Nervous about using public Wi-Fi? Imagine being able to turn yourself invisible to hackers on public networks. Having McAfee Plus is just like that. With the click of a button, you can disappear from hackers trying to steal your data and snoop on your internet activity. Browse, shop, and bank confidently, knowing your privacy and safety are protected. Get all-in-one protection with McAfee Plus and learn how to protect your everything at McAfee.com/podcast.
Kohler Smart Toilets introduce a new standard of design and cleanliness, sculptural forms, intuitive technology, and total personalization with integrated warm water cleansing, heated seats, and warm air dryers. For peace of mind and convenience, there are touchless lids, seats, flush, and a self-sanitizing bidet wand. Now you can even use voice commands with NUMI 2.0, featuring built-in Amazon Alexa. Explore the complete lineup at Kohler.com/smarttoilets and discover what you've been missing.
TaxAct can think of a million things more fun than filing taxes. TaxAct is going to name some now. Sitting in traffic. Folding a fitted bedsheet. Listening to your coworker talk about his fantasy team. Digging a hole. Digging an even larger hole next to that original hole. Unfortunately, TaxAct's filing software can't make taxes fun. But TaxAct can help you get them done. TaxAct. Let's get them over with.
The reviews are in for McDonald's hotter, juicier burgers. Let's hear what Hamburglar has to say.
Robble, robble.
What our old friend Hamburglar said is, the patties are juicier. The bun is a thing of beauty. The cheese perfectly melted.
Robble.
My burger dreams have come true. You heard him, folks. These are McDonald's best burgers ever. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Robble. Available at most restaurants in this area. Comparison of McDonald's classic burgers to prior burgers.
Luxury is meant to be livable. Discover the new leather collection at Ashley with premium quality leather sofas, recliners, and more, all built to last. No matter how many spills, scuffs, or pet-related mishaps come its way, the leather collection at Ashley is made with the durability you need for the whole family. Shop the new leather collection at Ashley and find chairs starting at $499.99 and sofas at $599.99. Ashley, for the love of home.
How's it going, and welcome to episode 71 of On the Wire. Proud member of the Pitcherless Podcast Network. Follow the pod on the Twitter at OnTheWirePod. Of course, if you're listening on a platform that allows ratings and reviews, please take a second to let us know what you think. I am Adam Howe. You can follow me on the Twitter at 80grade. That's all spelled out. And once again, I am joined by my co-host Kevin Hasting. Of course, should be followed himself on the Twitter at HastingKevin. Welcome back, Kevin. Hope your camping trip went pretty good. I know you didn't really have any service, so it must have been nice to just be separated from the mayhem of everything. Hopefully you were able to set your lineups before you left, though.
Yeah, it was great. And yeah, the service, it was funny. I left the campsite. We were at the base of a cliff on the beach, so there was no signal at all. And I left before the rest of my family and got to where I had signal a couple hours before FAAB ran on Sunday evening. And so I listened to you and Pete as I was frantically catching up what had happened over the previous 3 days, and got my bids in on time. Thanks to Pete for filling in, and to both of you for all the help that I needed to catch up on what I had missed for 3 days.
It's always nice to know that you can be helped as well. It makes everybody realize that, hey, we're playing the same game as you guys are listening. And so any help is always appreciated from any direction you can get it from, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
All right. I'm glad you were able to sneak away and get that going. I'm sure the rest of your family knew exactly what was up on a Sunday, but it's fine. It's something you live with when you've been doing it this long. All right, this week, this is going to be that one episode. I think I mentioned it with Pete last week. We never change our format all season long. And then, of course, this very next episode, I'm about to make an announcement like, hey, we're going to change our format just ever so slightly, as, of course, with the trade deadline happening earlier this week, a lot is going on there. So we will be changing our format ever so slightly. We're still going to be hitting up our news and notes section. And we're still going to be working on our focus topic, where we talk with our esteemed guest about something very specific with them. But instead of going through recommendations by recommendations through categories, we're going to be breaking down pretty much every FAAB related trade that happened this past week. And that's to say that we don't necessarily care that Juan Soto moved to the San Diego Padres and the impact of him specifically, but maybe we'll talk about what he left behind in Washington or things that we might want to consider for our FAAB pickups that created vacuums that need to be filled by something else. So with that being said, since we will be breaking down different lineups, rotations, and bullpen implications of all the moves made, we could think of no one better to bring in to help us out do that than the man who does that literally on a daily basis, Jason Martinez, the founder and manager of Roster Resource, the tool pretty much all of us use on our daily basis via tweets, podcasts, or even articles, whether we admit it or not. He joins us today to lend his experience in breaking down all the teams adjusting based on the players that they have at their disposal. Jason can be keen and should be followed on the Twitter at JasonRR Martinez for all the updates he makes to Roster Resource depth charts, which of course can be found embedded within the Fangraph website as well. Jason, thanks so much for joining us, man.
Hey, Adam, it's a pleasure. It's always nice to be able to explain what I do to all those fantasy managers out there who use the site. And so it is very, I think if you do understand if you understand Roster Resource and how I bring that information there and what it all means and stuff, you go to the pages and it makes sense. But for a lot of people, I think, especially if you just heard about it, you go there and you go, I don't understand what's going on here. And so whenever I have an opportunity to go on a fantasy podcast, it's enjoy being able to explain what I'm thinking and how it all works out and what everything means.
I think that the misnomer that I think a lot of people, or the mistake that people make with Roster Resource when they first come across it, like for the first time, whether that was years ago or yesterday, is realizing that Roster Resource is not coming from the teams. It's not like straight on, hey, this change was made, this is exactly what's going to happen. It's using your experience and using your best guess, really, what it comes down to. And we'll get into this a lot more detail when we move into our focus topic. But I think that's something worth mentioning right from the get-go. When people quote, hey, Roster Resource has this lineup. Like, yeah, that's what Jason thinks is going to happen, and he'll make adjustments, I'm sure. But how many times do you get called out when you make an adjustment that, like, just at least a couple people completely disagree with?
Yeah, not anymore. It used to happen a lot, which is frustrating because once you really try to explain how it works, it's almost the manager doesn't even really know what's going to happen. Off season, it's all you're really looking at it's a projection for the most part, unless the manager or GM comes out and says something very specific. And then you're really adjusting. You can't really adjust too much until you get to spring training. You see who's healthy, and then you see how things are lining up. And then you're really focused on, okay, what's that opening day roster look like? What does the lineup look like? That's where we are at this point. And now, once the season starts, it's all okay. You're making adjustments every single day, and if you're not paying attention every day, you're gonna miss something. And so you can always say that's not what's happening, and you go, okay, unless you can point to the manager actually saying, yeah, this guy's our closer, which they rarely say anymore. It's really
and you can't always trust that either. You can't always trust exactly what the manager says.
He could change his mind for any reason, not just, well, I put that guy in and he wasn't any good today, I'm going to change my mind. It could just be like, you know what? I had a better feeling about this guy. I saw the matchup and I went a different direction. So whatever. I'm sorry. Sorry about your fantasy team. It's not really. And so it is constant. So it's really a matter of, do you trust me to be paying attention to this stuff and make adjustments? Because I am focused on this stuff. And if I projected this platoon, does that necessarily mean that's the platoon? They could come back. I just saw I think the Giants face like 4 or 5 lefties in a row. And so do they just go with the same exact lineup? They have a bunch of lefties and righties, and they don't all platoon on the same day. And it's like some left-handed hitters play most of the time, but if you're going to give them a break, you're going to sit them against this other tough lefty. And so there's so much context that goes into it. I enjoy it, but unfortunately, I don't get a lot of people, maybe in the fantasy world, maybe behind the scenes, you'll see a lot of that. Oh, Roster Resource doesn't know this and that. And they don't really come at me with that stuff. And I don't even know if they understand how it's operated. It's just me. It's just me paying attention to this stuff and making changes. And I love explaining it too. If you ask me about it, I go, oh, this is what I'm thinking. But yeah, this stuff does change quickly and often.
That is absolutely true. I've seen plenty of responses that you've made on Twitter, and you are a saint for doing so. But to echo what you said, you obviously are very welcome to questions and whatnot. So make sure, if you guys aren't already, you're following Jason on Twitter at Jason R. Martinez to get all the insights there. And if you see something that stands out on Roster Resource, as he said, he is very welcome to discussing that a little bit further. Keep it on Twitter too, because then other people get to see that interaction as well. So let's just get right into it, guys. Then, as you mentioned, Jason, sometimes a manager does come out and make certain announcements, whether it's about their lineup changes or their closer situation. And Kevin, I'm going to start with you with one of those announcements. Torey Lovullo of Arizona, he came out and announced that he is intending to move to a closer by committee system at the end of games for the Diamondbacks. So with that in mind, does this give you more desire to bid on any other particular Diamondbacks bullpen piece if you're desperate for saves, or are you more likely to be on the opposite end of that and just nothing to do with this rotation? And if you have Mark Melancon somewhere, you're willing to drop and at least bench him for better matchups?
No, I think Ian Kennedy's the guy I'm after here this week. I was surprised at his availability because he had been getting talk even prior to the trade deadline really getting too close. Melancon was faltering a little bit. Ian Kennedy would fill in here and there. And Kennedy had 2 saves already this week. And he hasn't given up more than an earned run since early May. Not early May, May 22nd. He gave up 2 earned runs. Since then, a 2.12 ERA, 3 saves. Like I said, 2 of them coming this week now with Melancon gone. And I think managers lots of times will say closer by committee, but have a main guy in mind. And also it's better than saying, hey, Melancon, you're fired. We're going to go to closer by committee. Sounds a little better, I think. But I think Kennedy probably gets a majority of the opportunities here. Decent schedule coming up for Arizona. 4 games to start the week against Pittsburgh. Probably couldn't ask for much better than that. They do have to go to Colorado for the second half of the week. But yeah, I'm looking at Ian Kennedy here. He's only 19% rostered in main events. That surprised me. The 8% in 12-team online championships, not quite as surprising. But in those deeper leagues, I'm surprised he's available in 80% of leagues.
Yeah, bullpen by committee or closer by committee, matchups based closer committee. That's the thing you're going to hear with whenever there's any change. So you have to look at to this specific situation and you go, yeah, Melancon's been on the ropes all year. There wasn't one specific game within the last couple of weeks where it's just like, all right, get this guy out of here. I think they just decided we're at this point where it's time to go in a different direction. And then, of course, you go, the safe pick is going to be Ian Kennedy, but you're also in a situation where you got to start looking ahead. Is there anybody else here who can possibly be auditioning for a closer next year? So you look at the All-Star Joe Mantiply, a guy like Kevin Ginkel, who just got called up and hasn't really been on the pitcher for a couple years. But if you go back, I know it's been a long time, since 2019, I think. He was one of their up-and-coming guys who you thought, okay, future closer here. And so whatever's happened with him, I think some injuries, he was removed from the 40-man roster, and now he's back. Looks pretty good. Chris Davinsky looks really good, although he's also going to be a free agent. So maybe I think the focus is going to be between like, okay, let's just make sure we got somebody who's going to lock things down in the 9th. Ian Kennedy seems like the safe pick. But also, yeah, let's look ahead to 2023. Can Mantiply be more than just your primary setup man? Can he get out lefties and righties? And then maybe Kevin Ginkel back. Can he be somebody who's pitching in the late innings?
Yeah, Melancon's still under contract through next year as well with a $6 million price tag. Kennedy only has a club option for next year, so only $4 million, so it's possible that they bring him back, but I think it's equally likely that they just buy him out at $250K and move on and then see what else they got. You mentioned all those other guys that are in the wings, whether they're free agents or not. So as far as 2023 goes, Melancon still's got the $6 million price tag, but at this stage of the year, you're not losing out. It's not the money that's going to hold you in a position. I mean, he's not got double digits. It's not like a Kenley Jansen situation or a Kimbrel or somebody else that has a decent contract on their shoulders that's going to keep them in place regardless of what's going on. Not surprised what was, as you guys both mentioned, like the wordplay that was used by committee. Melanson went through a whole string of 2 weeks without even being used at one point. Didn't go on the IL, didn't get any opportunities. So shouldn't be terribly surprising at this point. All right, we had a whole bunch of not just trades, DFAs, releases happen this past week. I'm going to list off a bunch of these for you, Jason. I'm going to get your take on what's next for any of these guys. Jackie Bradley Jr. became a free agent out of Boston. Didi Gregorius got cut from the Phillies. Dinelson Lamet, who we'll get to in a second as well, got traded and cut from the Brewers. Yoshi Susugo left the Pirates. Pedro Severino was finally cut from Milwaukee. Then you have Alcides Escobar, Rougned Odor, Jonathan Villar, and Robinson Cano leaving their respective teams as well throughout the course of the week. Villar cut last weekend. We just didn't touch on it. They were all either designated for assignment, cleared waivers, or some of them just outright released altogether. Do any of these guys have a path to being signed elsewhere before the end of the season and finding actual fantasy relevant success in the final weeks?
Yeah, I don't really like any of those guys. I think as far as signing with a team, like Jackie Bradley Jr. has the value as that veteran guy who can still play really good defense. Is he going to get at bats? He can't hit, and that's a problem. Didi Gregorius will probably, I don't see a path to him getting a playing time anywhere, even if he does sign. Yoshi Susugo, I don't know if he's going to get another chance, but he was a guy that got picked up late last year and then went off for the Pirates. And that's why they brought him back. But then he's back to where he was struggling again. If there's one guy who has a recent experience of, okay, we picked this guy up, he got hot, and he can really help a team out. There's not that many at-bats to go around. Lamet is not so interesting to me for as much as everybody's talking about him, and mostly because I follow the Padres so closely. As a Padres fan, and this is a long process of him. He came back from Tommy John surgery, brought him back slowly, eventually got to the point where he was an NL Cy Young candidate. He was really good. They shut him down. They said, probably need Tommy John again. And by the way, Mike Clevenger was shut down at the same time and decided, I'm going to have the surgery. I think that might have been his second as well. So these guys don't want to undergo surgery. I'm sure it's not fun. And so the guy tried to rest in rehab, came back, and they brought him along slowly. It looked like the same guy. And then I think he ended up on the IL with the same elbow injury 2 or 3 times. And then they finally said, okay, if you're not going to have the surgery, then, we're just going to keep you in the bullpen. Maybe you can be a dominant reliever. That hasn't really ever happened. I'm not sure what the Rockies are going to try to fix him, but I think I know what will fix him, and it's probably a Tommy John surgery. But it's more interesting that everybody's talking about the guy, and I think it is because he was so good just 2 seasons ago, and if he would have had the surgery, would he be back to where he was, a dominant starting pitcher? I don't know. But yeah, that's a bummer of a situation.
The common mentality I think you hear about with Lamet is like, why not just make him a closer or at least a dominant end of game bullpen piece? And you think, oh, Colorado picked him up. But of course, the only move Colorado made at the trade deadline was extending their current 37-year-old closer. And so maybe that role isn't exactly open for him in Colorado, nor do I think anybody would believe that he would excel in that role in Colorado of all places as well. So very interesting to see Colorado basically feel left out maybe by not making a single trade. So they're like, oh, we might as well pick up the leftovers from another trade that was made and pick up Lamet, who was cut by the team that traded for him. All right, you talked about Yoshi Susugo being let go of the Pirates and seeing if he has an opportunity of doing what he did last year. But when he left the Pirates, Kevin, it made room for Tucupito Marcano, and he comes back up. He's made a couple of appearances at the major league level in the past. So how likely is it that this trip is something a little bit more permanent? And if so, can he be helpful for at least through the remainder of this season?
I think it can be somewhat permanent. I think they're going to see what they have here. He's still 22 years old, I believe, and they'll probably let him go here for the next couple months. I think the interesting part is he has led off the past couple of games, as he did for about a week at the end of his last call-up in mid-June. The final 6 games of that stint with the Pirates, he led off, and he's hit in the leadoff role, but not for any power to speak of, which he doesn't have. And unfortunately, he's just been getting caught this season at every level when he's attempting to steal bases. He's got 6 stolen bases between AA, AAA, and MLB. He's also been caught 6 times. In fact, he was 1 out of 5 at AAA. So that's discouraging. When you look at his projections rest of season and what he's done so far in his MLB appearances this season, we get what we expect from a 1 or 9 hole hitter, between 65, 70 runs pace for a season, not many RBI to speak of. And unless he is going to be cut loose on the base paths and see more success, I don't see a lot of fantasy value here, but it's worth keeping an eye on. If he's going to lead off and if he does start to continue to get stolen base opportunities and start to convert them, then maybe there is something. But right now it's just keep a watchful eye here.
Yeah, this is one of those notes, Kevin, that always it brings me back to like our off-season notes. And I know we talked about Marcano way back when we were talking about the possibility of him actually breaking the opening day roster as the starting second baseman for Pittsburgh, and whether or not we had interest there. In everything you just said there pretty much mimicked, I think, what we talked about back at the beginning of the season. Obviously that didn't hold, but there's obviously, this is a different time of the season to be making those assumptions, and that might happen for the next month and a half rather than 6-month period.
Hey, Kevin, Marcano's batting 6th today.
Back to 6th already. Yeah.
Two days at the leadoff spot, and they're like, it's enough.
You've seen enough.
You want Newman back.
When you have a chance of putting Kevin Newman back in your leadoff spot, you take it, right?
Sixth is interesting, though, because typically he's been at the bottom or the top. So squeezing him in there at 6th is interesting. We'll have to see what happens.
Yeah, they got Greg Allen 7th, Josh Van Meter 8th, and Jason DeLay 9th. So that's probably why. But yeah, I think, like I said, it's interesting that I think the path for him to actually stay in the lineup is there this time. As before, there's just so many guys that they want to take a look at this year. And they're looking at Cal Mitchell, Black Madras. They were going to take a look at Kanan Smith and the Jigba before he got hurt. As far as guys that they want to take a look at, maybe Travis Swaggerty at some point. Maybe they'll bring Jack Sawinski back. But I think at this point they want to see what this kid has. But yeah, like you're right. It's the speed really isn't, whether he's an athletic, fast kid who's like advanced for his age. He was in the majors at 21 because the Padres thought like, all right, this guy can handle it. He's really good defensively, just great instincts, but he's probably years away from that. Any power developing, and then that speed is he's fast, but stealing bases is different, especially at the major league level. If you watch minor league baseball right now, those dudes, the guys that are fast are just running at will, like playing in a minor, like playing in Little League. Like the fast guys in Little League will just take off and get me in a pickle. I don't care. I'm just gonna play with you guys. It's just like these guys are running at will in the minors, and you get to the majors, it's a different story.
All right, somebody else that is getting a taste of the majors, Jason, is Bubba Thompson. He got promoted by the Rangers. What role do you see, or do you expect him to play for Texas, and for how long?
An intriguing guy for fantasy baseball because of that speed, because of that power. As recent as 2000, before this season, I think his prospect status had dropped a lot because it's really hard to see a guy like him being able to make enough contact to play every day. It's okay. You can steal bases. You can run into one, hit with some power, but you got to get on base. And I think before this year, I think the experts were probably thinking, this guy probably isn't going to be more than a 4th outfielder. And then, like a lot of guys who get to AAA, they put up huge numbers, and you go, okay, what's different here? I don't know what's different. I'll just look at it as numbers and going like, all right, this is interesting. He's still striking out a lot. He doesn't walk very often. And yeah, that's 49 stolen bases in AAA with 13 homers. And then we've seen what he can do in just 2 games. Just bunt single, steals a couple bases. And so again, it's the situation that he's in on the Rangers. They are a little bit different than the Pirates in that they do want to look ahead to 2023, but also they spent a lot of money this year. They're in that transition stage where we can't just get our butts kicked every day. We spent a lot of money on our guys, and we're going to go out and try to win. And so if we're putting you in the lineup, you need to produce.
To do your job, right?
Yeah, you can't. And that's the case with most players in fantasy baseball. It's like, how much this guy, how bad does this guy have to be before the manager takes him out of the lineup? You know what I mean? That was a big thing with Billy Hamilton back in the day. If you give the guy 600 plate appearances, he's going to steal 120 bases. Okay, yeah, but at what point is the manager going to decide that 290 on base percentage is just not worth it? And so you look at a guy like Bubba Thompson and you go, at what point are the Rangers going to say, if he does struggle, we're going to take you out of the lineup? And at this point, there's a couple guys there. Now, Steele Walker and Steven Duggar are out of the picture. They DFA'd those guys to make room. Cole Calhoun is on the IL, hasn't had a great season. Once his heel isn't hurting anymore, are they going to just give him at-bats again? I don't know if that's the case, but it's really going to depend on Thompson. So let's look at it that way. And in 10 days, Cole Calhoun is going to say, I'm ready to go. Put me back in the lineup. And if Bubba Thompson if he's 3 for his last 21 with 10 strikeouts, they'll probably take him out of the lineup. So it really is going to depend on these next week or two. And he's definitely the kind of guy that he's going to give fantasy managers he could give them a difficult decision if he has a really good month or two. And so the season ends, the guy's had 150 plate appearances, and he's been really good. He strikes out some, but he's hit some homers, he's stolen a lot of bases, and everybody's, Bubba Thompson, he's going to be a stud. Wait till you give him a full season. And then 162 games is a lot different. And so I can see him being in that situation as well. But as far as just look short term, I think he's going to get a really good look for a week or two. And then you do have an option. You do have an option in Cole Calhoun. Is just like, all right, let's just give Calhoun the job back. He's the guy we paid to be our starter, and let him finish out the year. We're going to go out there and we're going to try to win every single game because that's where we are as a team.
Yeah, 162 games is a lot different than 162 at bats. So let's pump the brakes maybe this offseason. I'm sure it'll be something we all talk about if what you say happens. Something obviously we all need to consider. Well, somebody else might be looking at 162 at bats as he got the call up in Kansas City, Kevin. Your Royals called up Michael Massey after parting ways with Whit Merrifield. And Massey seems to be holding down the fort at second base since the call up. What can you tell us all about him as a player? As I'm sure you've been following him a lot longer than most people, minus prospect towns and what have you. And what do you think as a Royals fan are you hoping or expecting to get from him the rest of the way?
Yeah, it was pretty disappointing on Friday. They moved him up to the 2-hole in the lineup and he went 0 for 5. Now I'm not putting a whole lot on one game and 5 plate appearances, but their lineup isn't out yet today for Saturday. I'm hoping they keep him up there towards the top of the lineup so we can see what he can do up there. This is a guy, he was 4th round pick out of Illinois back in 2019 and had a decent rookie season. And then of course we had 2020, didn't see him. So this is a guy that kind of popped up on people's radars over the past couple of seasons, a 21 home run, 12 stolen base season with 87 RBI in less than 100 games in 2021 at high A. People started to take notice, and then he was following it up this season with 16 home runs and 13 stolen bases across AA and AAA. So he's really caught people's eye that pay attention to the Royals farm system. And now we've seen 6 singles in 20 plate appearances, and we don't know what to make of it yet. It's going to take a little while, but second base, I think, is his spot the rest of the season. What I really want to see is where is he going to be in the lineup? Because I think we will see a handful of home runs and a handful of stolen bases the rest of the way. If that comes in the top half of the lineup where we get runs and RBI along with it, then we're in business. And this is somebody that is useful on our fantasy teams. But it's going to be interesting to see over the next, we still have Saturday and Sunday before we put our bids in Sunday night. I think he's going to be a pretty popular ad, but in most leagues, most people don't have a whole lot of money left. So it's not going to be like we're going triple digits here or anything, but I think he's going to be the top of a lot of people's claim lists.
In my home dynasty league, he's available, and we have a very specific rule where if you make your debut, you're basically put on waivers for a couple days so everybody can get a sense of where you're at. this is a tough week to make a fast finger move because of all the other adjustments that the lineups have made, whether you're trying to find the next closer that's going to be popping into a spot or just trying to take advantage of other vacuums that have been created. So he's still out there, and I'm waiting for somebody to be like, you know what? I'm grabbing him. We'll see. We'll figure it out later. But the fact that he's still sitting there was interesting to me. And I think it just goes into the fact that you were saying, Kevin, he didn't come out of nowhere, but he is a more recent observed prospect or high ranked prospect. He's also not highly ranked on most lists, at least going into this season, regardless of what we saw him do in 2021, as you mentioned. But in redraft leagues, I think it is worth mentioning again, playing time is key. And if he's going to be playing, regardless if he ends up in the 6 or 7 hole or he holds down a 2 spot, even in Kansas City, and your Royals have been hitting decently, as you mentioned a couple of weeks ago. Those adjustments are being felt. They're not just because they lost a couple of key pieces. Let's not forget Whit Merrifield wasn't exactly lighting it up this year. So losing him out of that lineup doesn't exactly say this is a pushover offense. The Bobby Witts and the MJ Melendez's of the world are still holding their own there. And so wherever he ends up being the lineup in Kansas City, I'm still interested because he's going to be at second base pretty much every day, like you said. Jason, Cleveland made a bunch of moves. Didn't make a whole lot of trades, but they did make some demotions and promotions this week, sending down Franmil Reyes while activating Oscar Gonzalez in his place in the outfield. And then on top of that, the Guardians promoted infielder Tyler Freeman and starting pitcher Hunter Gaddis, who started on Friday. Do you see any of these moves as more permanent than the others, at least through the end of 2022? And what role are you expecting to see from each of these guys?
Yeah, I think with Franmil out of the picture, it gives them some flexibility to allow somebody like Freeman to play often. As you'll see, like he started the last 3 games, and then I think they had Jose Ramirez DH one game, and then Ahmed Rosario was a DH. It's without having that guy in the lineup who has to be your DH. It does give them that flexibility, but still they're set with Jimenez, Rosario, and Ramirez in that infield spot. So I think, as you can see with a guy like Ernie Clement, at some point you're going to be like, yeah, this guy's not really helping us, but you don't really need to play that guy. You just need a guy who's taking up a spot on the bench. And so if you bring up a really good prospect, Tyler Freeman, you do want to see that guy play. It sucks when these guys get called up and instead of getting regular at-bats in the minors, they're just sitting on the bench for 4 or 5 days in a row. And that's not a good role for somebody a young guy who you're hoping can be a part of your starting lineup in the future. So I think there is some flexibility there. I do think they would like to see Franmil turn things around. He was a beast before they acquired him with the Padres. He was putting up huge numbers. He was like homering, like it seemed every day he was homering. So I think they'd like to see him get back on track, but probably not counting on it. I think they have enough talent in that lineup. I think Oscar Gonzalez he's at least going to be in there against lefties, maybe in a platoon with Nolan Jones. So I think I was interested to see Will Benson play a little bit more. I think he's only gotten 1 start in center field. Not sure. He has some speed. He has some power. Not sure if there's a path for playing time there. And then as far as Hunter Gaddis, probably just think he had that opportunity yesterday to show the team that, okay, I'm here when you need me. And then he wasn't very good. And they got Aaron Savali, I think he's made 1 rehab start, maybe 2. He should be back soon. So I don't think Gaddis did himself any favors. They got a few options down there and some younger guys who aren't on the 40-man roster yet, who are actually probably deserving of a shot. So a lot of options. So as far as Gaddis put himself, with his minor league performance, he put himself in that spot to get that call up. But it's probably only temporary. And so now it's just going to go back down, and it's a matter of, all right, who's next in line? Who's our number 6 next time we need one? But as far as short term, it was probably just that spot start.
Yeah, I wouldn't be throwing down a bunch of cash on Gaddis, I think, this weekend with his future completely. And he, like you said, he didn't do himself any favors with his outing on Friday with his debut. All right, Kevin, in Cincinnati, Jose Barrero was called back up by the Reds. What's similar to Marcano we talked about earlier, like what sort of playing time are you expecting from this stint, Barrero, as they are shuffling their infield in Cincinnati this time around?
This all depends on his strikeout rate. And I think this is, without having inside knowledge of any sort, this appears to me that they just want to see if their major league hitting coaches can help him figure this out, because a 37.6% strikeout rate and 237 plate appearances at AAA does not warrant a call up, regardless of need at the major league level. I think this is them get some other eyes on him, get a couple new faces giving him advice, and see if they can figure this out. Because in 2021, he only struck out 22% of the time at AAA. Something has went really wrong this season, and it's not a change of level. It's at the same level. And he hadn't had this issue with strikeouts in the past. It's been in the low 20 percentile or 20% range for strikeout rate. And so I think this is to see if they can figure that out. And that is 100% going to determine how long he sticks here. And at the moment, it's unusable. He is in fantasy with that strikeout rate. The 9 home runs, 5 stolen bases in 55 games, that's really nice. We're looking at a 25-15 guy if he can hit and get on base, which he has not done this season so far, or at all at the major league level, even though it was a pretty brief appearance before.
All right, Jason, a bunch of stuff happened in Miami. I'm just giving you all the teams that made a bunch of moves, it seems like. And Jesus Sanchez got sent down. Nick Neart got optioned down to AAA as well, while calling up Edward Cabrera and outfielder Peyton Burdick. They get the call into their respective positions. Now the Marlins have Jesus Luzardo and Cabrera back in their active roster, presumably both in the rotation as well. And Craig Mish of Miami Herald suggested that Burdick should see regular playing time for the Marlins as they try to figure out what they have in their outfield moving forward through the rest of this year and into 2023. So what expectations do you have for both the rotation and the outfield for the Marlins through the end of this year?
Yeah, that pitching staff that starting rotation is so good. It's just, you can act, if you're a Marlins fan, it's probably a rough year, and they probably thought this way for a couple of years, but they go, look at our starting rotation is going to be so good, and they are good. You can look ahead to next year with these guys, and they have, I think, arguably the top pitching prospect in baseball now, and Yuri Perez, who's only 19 and is dominating Double-A. Maybe get Sixto Sanchez back at some point. But at this point, you got room for those 2 younger guys, and Cabrera and Jesus Luzardo, who haven't gotten a full season in yet. We're not quite. It was close to breaking out, and then he struggled, and that's how he ended up in Miami. But you got all these guys, and the only guy who's going to come in and probably give them a decision to make is Trevor Rogers when he comes back from the IL. But 6 starters, and probably not going to go outside of that with Max Meyer out, Tommy John surgery. And Sixto Sanchez, I haven't heard anything about, so I'm assuming he's not going to pitch this year. So I think those 2 guys, Cabrera and Luzardo, I think we're finally to the point where you can say, all right, those guys are going to start every 5 or 6 days. Okay, that's good. And then looking at Peyton Burdick and that situation in Miami, it's an opportunity to take a look at one of their better prospects. They're taking a look at J.J. Bleday right now, getting a long look at him, finally getting a little bit of a look at Lewin Diaz. But they do have, with Brian Anderson coming back from the IL, John Birdie's coming back from the IL. Those guys are already on a rehab assignment. When Avisail Garcia, Jorge Soler get back, they're going to play. Those guys signed multi-year contracts. So the Marlins could look ahead and say, let's see what we have with our young guys. But there's not really a lot of room for them. So if you're Bleday and you're Burdick, you're just kind of, this is an audition right now. And then they need to make it. I'm going to give them a tough decision to make once all these guys are healthy. I mean, the only way you do that is by producing right now, because you're not going to have a lot of time. If you don't do if you struggle in this short period of time, you're going to get sent back to the minors, and people are going to forget about you over the winter. And maybe the team doesn't forget about you. Maybe they still think like this guy's going to be a big part of 2023. But especially fantasy managers or just baseball fans are like, oh, yeah, that guy, I saw that guy. He was 3 for 18. Then they sent him back. Yeah, he's not any good. It's all about opportunity right now. So you got to take advantage, or else it's going to be a really easy roster move to make once those other guys start coming back.
All right, I'm gonna jump back a little bit, as I just was informed by my buzzes from my phone. A couple of notes that go back to what we talked about earlier with Cleveland. They made a couple other moves as we were recording this. Franmil Reyes was actually DFA'd from what I'm reading. And they also released Bobby Bradley as well. So both these guys obviously not affecting their major league rosters at the moment, but it is something worth noting as far as finding a new home for these guys, and if they can find kind of new life, especially when it comes to Reyes finding a new spot. And now that you have obviously a DH option across baseball, he should have some suitors, I believe. Kevin, on that note, are you more or less likely to hold on to Reyes, knowing that he now has an opportunity to get picked up somewhere else where he might get back onto a major league team?
I think I got to hold on a week and see if he lands somewhere immediately with that, which I think he will, and then evaluate is he going to get the playing time, or where's he going to be in the lineup, and how is the lineup. The way we look at everybody, especially in the off season, we'll have to do it really quickly. But I think that now with this news, he may have been a drop in some spots where you needed roster room. But now, if I can, I'm going to hold him a week.
All right, Kevin, I'll stick with you in this other note with the release we talked about earlier, Didi Gregorius leaving the Phillies. Your boy Gene Segura took his roster spot by coming off the IL, as you talked about a couple of weeks ago, as you were holding on to him and picking him up where you could a little early. How quickly are you plugging him back into your lineups, and how much does this play into Philly's confidence level in rookie Bryson Stott holding shortstop down the rest of the way?
I think they'll both be in the lineup pretty much every day. And yeah, putting Segura back in my lineups right away. The stolen bases were a pleasant surprise. Not that he was doing it at all, but he was on pace for more than I expected. But the bad X has him projected for 6 home runs, 4 stolen bases the rest of the way. We have a full third, actually a game or two more than a third of the season left. We're getting down to crunch time, but in this last couple of months of the season, we still have a full third of the games left to play. We're looking at a guy on pace for 15 to 20 home runs and double-digit stolen bases. That's what I expected from him. The stolen bases were a little better than that in the first couple of months of the season when he was so great. Batting average about what I expected. So, yeah, getting him right back in there and pretty much expect what the projections have for him. And if he does continue to steal a couple more bases than we expected, even better.
Bonus. All right, Jason, in LA, Dodgers making a bunch of moves as well. Chris Taylor, he returned from the IL into the lineup, and Edwin Rios is still in the middle of his rehab stint. He probably should return within the next week, I would assume, based on how he ends up doing there. Though LA fans were excited to see Miguel Vargas make his debut, top prospect, especially Twitter handle at Miguel V Debut, who already went through his Vinny P debut handle, switched over to Vargas. So I'm curious to know how he switches up, or he or she switches that handle up now with Vargas making his debut. He needs somebody else to focus on. So make sure you follow that. But is Vargas destined to return to the minors soon, as James Outman was just sent back down, even though he had a nice hot start to his major league career after they traded for Joey Gallo?
Yeah, most likely. Although it's going to be interesting to see how much they really like Hanser Alberto, because I think at this point in the season, they could probably look at that Vargas and say, look, he's not going to play every day, but we like him enough. We feel like he's proven himself in AAA, nothing else. He's just going to come up here and help us win a World Series, and he's going to play 3 to 4 times a week. We're not sure what Justin Turner's if he's going to ever get back to full health, or if he's ever going to be super productive again. They could just do the easy move and just say, Vargas, go back to the minors, and you got a big future here. Probably going to be starting in 2023 for us. But like I said, it's probably going to come down to how much do they like Hanser Alberto, or how much do they really think Vargas makes a difference playing 3 or 4 times a week. And Joey Gallo, I think they acquired him for a reason. They didn't acquire him just to sit him on the bench. I think he's going to play often enough for them to really get an understanding of, is this guy capable of turning it around? I think they took on all of his salary, his remaining salary. They gave up a pretty good prospect in Clayton Beater. So they didn't acquire Joey Gallo just to let him sit on the bench and come off the bench a couple times a week. I think they want to give him his at-bats. And so it's not a lot of room. So I think it's going to come down to Alberto versus Vargas. And so you got those two things to think about as far as that situation.
I'm getting these flashbacks with when Gavin Lux came up for the Dodgers, and just similar. It felt like it was similar time frame. Obviously, they were making a push for the World Series, and everybody thought, bring up Gavin Lux, he can help you win a World Series. And the playing time just wasn't there. He was just sitting around, soaking it all in, as much as the fans in the stands were. And I wonder if they treat Vargas the same way, or as you mentioned, if it's more beneficial for him to go back to the minors, get every day at bats, or for him to be ingrained into that roster as a central part to the future of that lineup. It will be interesting to see what happens. I venture to guess we'll be seeing that choice having to be made within the next couple of days, especially with Rios coming back. As I mentioned, Taylor came back into the lineup. Who's to say what happens with Turner as well, like you said, if whether or not he can stay healthy long enough to keep the amount of at-bats that you expect him to, a healthy Turner, to make. So it'll be interesting to see in FAAB this weekend how much people are buying into the name value and the production in the minors and what they expect him to do the rest of the way. I would probably keep the bids down a little bit lower. Kevin, what do you think?
Yeah, I think the kind of it's hard to say under the radar. It's such a big name, but Joey Gallo is very intriguing to me with this move. The Dodgers didn't grab him because they think he's going to hit 089 like he has over the last month or whatever. And Derek Carty's talked a lot about this on Twitter throughout the entire season. I had a conversation with a couple of my home league mates a couple of months ago. When you have a guy that typically hits 210, and then to start 2 months of 2019, he hit 270. At some point, he's going to hit 150 for a couple of months to even that out. I don't think Joey Gallo is any different than what we expected him to be coming into the season. And then it being a team like the Dodgers, who we have confidence in what they can do to help tweak a player's swing here or there. I think this is it. It definitely depends the type of league. If it's a points league where you get penalized for strikeouts, maybe not. In roto leagues, it depends on how the rest of your team is doing in batting average. But there's a real opportunity for Joey Gallo here. He's available. He's been dropped. He hasn't been worth using on our roster. So I think he's someone, if I have a spot, he's not someone I want to plug in my lineup right away. So you have to have a spot. But he's somebody worth grabbing right now, because if he gets hot with the Dodgers, then the price goes through the roof comparatively for what we have left in our budgets for the remainder of the season.
All right, Kevin, going up north to the Bay, the Giants they're expecting to get a bunch of offensive pieces back, if not already, by the time you're listening to this. Tyro Estrada, Jock Peterson, and Brandon Crawford, they are expected back into the Giants lineup very soon, if not, like I said, already. Because of all these additions or re-additions, who gets hurt the most in San Francisco as far as the playing time goes for the Giants?
I think the obvious one is Dixon Machado. Crawford and Estrada are the middle infielders for that team. And if they're both coming back at the same time, they're a couple of guys, especially Estrada, that are going to be in the lineup every day. It seems weird saying especially Estrada when we're talking about Estrada and Brandon Crawford and the Giants, but he's the guy that has been in the lineup on a daily basis for them in spite of matchups, as we know they like to play. And Jason alluded to it earlier. They don't even do it the same way each time that they're facing righties or lefties. There's so much more they put into it. So I think Machado actually gets sent back down. They're just not going to have room for him. I'm not too worried about Wilmer Flores. He always gets his at-bats somehow. He's so flexible. And then in the outfield, it's going to be interesting because Jock Peterson's going to play against righties and not against lefties. We know that's the case. But it's not just starting pitching when we're talking Giants and we're talking Rays and a couple of other teams around the league that we think of being further ahead of other teams in the amount of matchups they play. They do it throughout each and every game. So it's not just starting pitching. You've got to look at bullpens too. When it comes to these teams, it's tough. But the guy I'm most excited about, other than in leagues where you really need Jock Peterson's power, is Estrada, getting him back in there because he is the daily in lineups daily. And like I said, Machado is the obvious man out. And Wilmer Flores maybe a little bit, and then we'll see what happens in the outfield. It was interesting. Jason also brought up the string of lefties that the Giants played, and so many of us got excited about Austin Slater, and he didn't produce this time around. It's such a small sample size when we're looking at a small side platoon guy. Didn't work out this time, and they have a couple of lefties the first half of this upcoming week, so it's going to be really interesting to see what goes on.
All right, and the last note, Jason, I'm going to let you have the last word here because I think this is one of the more interesting ones. We actually got people asking about it in our Discord as well, the Pitcherless Discord. So I want to make sure I bring it up. Of course, we all heard of the Juan Soto trade, Josh Bell getting shipped off to San Diego. But more recently, we heard that Fernando Tatis Jr. was actually sent on a rehab assignment this week. My question to you, as you're managing the roster resource pages, if Tatis were to return today, how would you be building the new look San Diego lineup on roster resource, and who gets the bumps in both playing time and lineup slots as the way you see it?
Yeah, so it's, as far as the entire roster, it's a simple move. Tatis is going to play every day. Maybe they'll try to ease him back by giving him some DH at bats, but he's going to be in there every day. So you're looking at Ha-Seong Kim going to the bench. And so you got your starting 9 as maybe with Alfaro and Nola kind of splitting time evenly. But as far as the other 9, it's just a matter of, do you move down Jurickson Profar from the leadoff spot? Because he's been so effective there, and he's so good at working at bats. But also, do you want Josh Bell hitting lower in the lineup, hitting 5th? Jake Cronenworth is probably, I could even see them contemplating whether, hey, maybe Jake Cronenworth should hit leadoff, be in front of all these studs here. But I don't know. I think the biggest question is just going to be Profar leadoff or move him down to like 6th or something like that. And Cronenworth as well. The bottom of that lineup is going to be stacked. Trent Grisham's finally hitting a little bit here. But I can see, like a lot of baseball fans, and especially with what I do, and especially being a Padres fan, I looked at this lineup and like, all right, how are we going to structure this lineup? Are we going to go Tatis, Soto, Machado, Bell? It's really, and with the way they moved Tatis around so much, so initially it was like he's really good out of the leadoff spot. He's also really good out of a lot of spots, and eventually
he's just really good.
Yeah, but they stuck him in the cleanup spot for a while, and he was doing really well, of course. And I think they were like, maybe he's just really comfortable here. I think we haven't talked enough about I don't know how streaky he's going to be, but he's had a couple of 2 to 3 week ruts where it was like, wow, he just looks lost right now. And I think the end of the 2020 season, he ended that terribly, the regular season. And then against the Cardinals in that playoff series, he hit that big homer, and that was like a big deal, a big weight off of his back. But it was such a short time period, 60 games, where you got a guy who just like the best player on the planet for 40 of those games. And then for 20 games, he was really bad at the plate. And then he's been hurt so often. We don't know what 162 will look like. We have a feeling it's going to be, his half of a seasons have been great 162 game seasons. So whatever else he gives you is fine. It's just, I think you are going to have to make that decision with him, because he does go into these slumps where you go, is he more comfortable in the leadoff spot? Is he comfortable hitting second? Or maybe he's just a cleanup hitter. So I think we already saw with Soto, or he hit second his first game, and then Machado moved down to 3, where Machado had been hitting second a lot, and Soto has hit second and third, and it's, what does it matter? I don't know. And then against the lefty, they switched. So Machado was second and Soto was third. And so I think Soto, Machado, Tatis, probably interchangeable there. So yeah, the big question is going to be Tatis leadoff, move Profar down, or Profar leadoff, and maybe Tatis third or fourth. It's just going to be whoever hits fourth between Soto, Machado, Bell. You're actually in a situation where they can lose an at bat or win a game, and it's depending on how things go. And then as far as that roster, the one thing they were missing after that trade was a backup center fielder. Like, they don't have a backup center fielder on the roster. And I don't trust Trent Grisham to hit against lefties. I don't trust anybody else to play center field. And so when the Padres said he's going on a rehab assignment, he's going to play shortstop, he's going to play center field, and he's going to DH. And that's very interesting there, because I think you do want to be able to give Ha-Seong Kim his at-bats. He's been terrific at shortstop. he's having a solid season. If there was, I have a feeling that with the amount of playing time he's had and he's been able to get above average to this point where you look at his stats and you go, he's been an above average hitter and he's playing really good defense. And teams are going to be asking about him in the offseason, going like, we want that guy to be our starting shortstop or second baseman. So he's going to be valuable off the bench, but I think the way the Padres are going to be able to work him in is by giving Tatis at bats as a DH and then to give him some time in center field, which makes me a little nervous, but I think that's the direction they're heading. Unless there's another backup center fielder who makes sense, I don't see the fit right now. So I think those are a few of the really interesting questions that are going to come up.
Yeah, the one I'm most interested, you touched on it a lot, is the Jurickson Profar. Is I heard Scott Chu say on our First Pitch podcast the other day, he could, if he sticks in that leadoff spot, he could run away with the runs category through the rest of the year across baseball with that lineup in front of him, of course. And even though you said the bottom of that lineup is still very strong, he takes the biggest hit if he loses out on that spot. I don't think there's a question there. Something that I'll be watching tremendously, and not that he'll be an easy drop if he were to do that, but he'll be somebody more of a consideration of at least benching in the right matchups if necessary. All right, guys, that's going to wrap it up for our news and notes section of this episode. As always, we missed a whole bunch of stuff worth noting, and you should be listening to the aforementioned First Pitch podcast with Chad Young, Scott Chu, and Daniel Port. They break down all the news, highlights, and observations from every day's worth of games, as well as looking ahead at each slate to keep you up to date with everything you need to know to win your fantasy league. Just a moment, we're going to talk to Jason a little bit more about how he manages roster resource pages, something I know most of us rely so heavily on a daily basis. But before we do that, we're going to take this quick break.
Hey, Alex Fast here, and thanks for listening to this podcast on the Pitcher List Podcast Network. If you're a fan, consider supporting all of us by getting a PL Plus subscription, where you're going to get an ad-free website and get access to our Discord, where you can talk to all of our podcast hosts and staff. Plus, you can hang out with our incredible Pitcher List community. It's basically a baseball sanctuary year-round for as low as $8 a month. You can sign up at pitcherlist.com/plus, and you're going to get your first month free with promo code podcast. Also, don't forget to check out everything else we do as well, from YouTube videos, live streams, newsletters, off-season articles, TikToks, breakdowns, over 15 baseball podcasts on our network. We can't stop talking about baseball even during the off-season. So sign up for PL Plus today at pitcherlist.com/plus and use promo code podcast to get your first month free. All right. Thanks for listening. Let's get back to the show.
All right, we are back. Of course, you are listening to On the Wire. I am Adam Howe, joined, of course, by co-host Kevin Hasting and today's special guest, Jason Martinez of Roster Resource. Jason, we're going to talk to you a little bit before we get into kind of the implications of a lot of the trades that happen. I want to make sure, since we got you on the show, that we pick your brain about what you do. And this is a pretty typical section of the podcast, but you do something very specific, and you've been doing it for quite a while now. You've gotten pretty good at it, I would say. But I want to make sure people are aware, and we talked about it a little bit at the start of the show, but I would love for you to go into a little bit more detail into the process that you take to making the adjustments in Roster Resource, making those lineup adjustments. How do you adjust those lineups? How do you adjust the depth charts when roster moves are made, not only during the trade deadline, but as you mentioned earlier, in the offseason as signings are made, or as players don't get signed and there's a vacuum and you have to fill that vacuum. You still have to put 9 people in that lineup, whether or not they deserve it or not, or you think they're going to be there at the end of the offseason. In my head, I'm always picturing Orlando Arcia is the starting first baseman for Atlanta after Freeman was not signed before the Olsen trade or signing. Talk to me a little bit about do you have any help doing this? Is it all you all the time? And do you have any other secret inside information that you're not telling us about?
No, it's me, and it's a one-man show for when you're looking at those roster pages. I have some help with the payroll pages, which is something that I was doing for a while. And then once they brought the luxury tax stuff in, I don't think I want to get into all this stuff. It's just too much. And a guy who's been helping me, John Becker, he's been helping me for 10 years, maybe with little stuff here and there. I think he's been helping me since he was 14 years old. So yeah, I think he's 23 now. He was like, I'll do the payroll pages and I'll figure out the luxury tax stuff and I'll do that for you. And I go, okay, look, you just got to make sure that it's accurate, and people are going to ask you a lot of questions about this stuff. So as long as you can answer it, and as long as it makes sense, go for it. So I kind of handed to him over the payroll stuff, but it's only me on the roster and depth chart stuff. And it works best that way because, like I said, when I explain my process of doing it, I want you to be able to trust that I am paying attention to this stuff, and there's a reason behind everything. And so for me, the initial starting point was, this is the off season when I had the idea for the site. And it was always like, once we got to the off season, my team was bad. I'm a Padres fan. Like, we just had a bad year. What's my team going to look like? Let's start, I would write it all out, or I would type it out, and really wanted to see what all the teams look like. So it was more an interest there as far as like roster. What is the roster going to look like from the time that the end of the season until opening day? And so there was always a little bit of that interest there. And it was like, okay, when I think of a roster, I think starting lineup, I think bench, I think starting rotation, and who's the closer, who's the setup man. I look at a roster that way and I realize not everybody really thinks of it that way, but I want to be able to show in this chart form what I see. And initially it was very basic, and then I said there's a lot more information that if you just looked at the names, that doesn't tell you a whole lot. Even though a lot of people right away were like, you update this so quickly. That's why I really like it. It's accurate when I'm like, I'm just listing a lineup and I'm just listing a roster. I got some minor leaguers there, and it was still like a lot of interest. So I said, well, I do want to add a lot more information. I want to show how this player was acquired. I want to show how many options, how long is this player under contract. There's just so much information that I can add. And it was a long process to get to where it was. And as I learned along the way, it's really hard to explain my vision to somebody who's like a programmer or a developer. We just speak a different language, and I'm not good at explaining. And it really took until I went to Fangraphs, where they actually took my idea and just said, all right, we're going to take what you've done and we're going to move it to Fangraphs. And then little by little, it really started coming into place where it was like, yeah, this is it. This is what I want. And it seems like a lot of people understand it. And yeah, like I said, it's fun for me to strip everything down at the end of the season. And like you said, Orlando Arcia as the Braves first baseman, that people look at that and they go, what is this? And you go, well, yeah, man, they don't have a first baseman. You want me just to leave it blank?
That's the simplest.
Blank. They don't have a first baseman. You have found the missing link there to that lineup. Now we know what the Braves need. But yeah, so once I started doing that, we would get to opening day and you go, okay, now we have opening day rosters. Cool. And then initially when I started the site, you could see the interest just bottomed out pretty quickly. And I was like, okay, it's mostly fantasy managers that are just getting ready, and then they don't need me anymore. So it's been a lot of years kind of, it's a lot of work to do this accurately during the season. And also you're not getting a lot of traffic. So I'm like, is it even worth it? But so it took a few years to get to the point where it was like, okay, I think there's enough content that I can provide during the season. And I needed to get to the point where I could do this for my full-time job, because it's a job where you have to pay attention nonstop, which is which gives me an edge over anybody, because this is my job to do.
What you're doing.
It's what
Sure.
I do. Oh, you have so much. And I'm like, yeah, there's a reason for that. And I already was like, I was the friend who you would ask about baseball stuff, because that's just what I'm interested in. And then for me, it was always like, I want to be able to do something in my life where I'm just like, I want to be really good at something. And I know I have this interest in baseball and rosters and stuff. And I want to be able to put all my time and effort into it. And if I do that, I feel like I can be really good at something. And it's the Tony Gwynn thing. The thing is, his dad told him, if you work hard, good things will happen. And that's such a simple statement. You go, oh yeah, no, duh, of course. But you realize that there's so much that goes into that hard work and patience and things. You got to make the right choices and make the right adjustments. But I found that thing and got to a point where it's like, all right, I can make a living out of this. And now it's just a matter of managing this site and always trying to provide more content, or like what's going to be more helpful to, because I know who's reading it. I know why you're reading it. And so now it's just a matter of, okay, so why do you trust what I'm doing here? Or do you understand what I'm actually putting out of this on this website? So yeah.
I think that you touched on it, like over the years that you've been at Fangraphs, when did you make the official transition? I remember in my head seeing the notification, but I don't remember the date.
It was 2019, I think.
Yeah, okay. So it was before the 2020 season. But you've mentioned since joining Fangraphs, you've been able to work with developers and add more stuff and expand on the vision that you had for the site and the things it can offer. And I think that it's still probably, I don't know your traffic numbers and all that, but I venture to guess that the majority of people who are going to Rust Research are still just looking at the depth chart page. But I want to make sure that everybody is aware of just the transaction tracker I literally used today to prep for this episode. That it's just the fact that you put stuff on there that hasn't happened yet, but you obviously are more in tune with the news and tweets and all that stuff that's happening, that even though you can't find it on the MLB official transaction page because the paperwork hasn't been done yet, you're going to get a heads up on what could happen in the next couple of days. The closer depth chart review is always something because of the usage that you put in there as well. Those other in-season tools, I think, are just really invaluable, especially from a fantasy perspective. And I think that's also a reason why roster resource in general is referenced so much. But my question is about, what do you think was left behind from before you were in Fangraphs that they either get questions about? We got a question in the Discord about minor league baseball player power rankings, and they were just probably formatted differently on the old site. It doesn't pop in my head personally, but is there things that were on the old site that either morphed into a different way of seeing it in the Fangraph site over the years, or stuff that's just been lost completely that you think either aren't as useful or maybe you'll see them coming back in the future?
Yeah, and that's one good example. And it's really a matter of, the minor league power rankings have always been, once I came up with them, they've always been on the depth chart pages. So you have to scroll and see where the rankings are. And so the top 50 are highlighted. So if you went to a team and you just scroll down, when you see that red background, they're really easy to pick out. So you got an overall ranking, and you can see the red ones right away, and you go, okay, these guys are having a really good season. And then last 21 days as well. So if you see the red there, you go, oh, okay, this guy's not ranked very high during the season. He might be in 700 or maybe not ranked at all, but he's ranked 15th. And you go, oh, that guy's probably been red hot over the last 3 weeks. I definitely have a wish list, a Fangraphs wish list that's included on a leaderboard, like a power rankings leaderboard. So that's on the Fangraphs wish list. When it gets done, I don't know. But before I was at Fangraphs, I could just do anything on the Google Sheets. Mm-hmm. That's what I was doing. I was putting out a top 200 or whatever, and I would have rankings in there. I would show which levels they were at. So I think people liked seeing that once a week and say, these are the updated rankings, even though they were already on the pages. I had it all laid out.
Consolidated in one spot, sure.
Yeah. And so even though there wasn't a constant leaderboard being updated, once a week I would put this together, and it was way more work than it should be. And then these Google Sheets were so slow because there's so much data on there. And I was like, oh, I learned a new formula. Cool. Oh no, now it's even slower. And so it was that balance of, okay, I just want to wake up and just come up with new ideas every day. But it was slowing the site down even more because I didn't know how to build a website. I was basically doing this on Google Sheets and then figured out a way to embed the Google Sheet onto a website. So that this website is downloading 2 separate pages and it's taking forever. And so people weren't even complaining about it. Which was, I think, was bad because it was people just were yeah, that's just how it is. It's just slow. It's it's probably bad that people don't complain about this. Yeah. So now we don't have that issue anymore, but that's one thing. I think my knocking down the door column that I've done on and off for years, but that is highlighting probably 4 or 5 minor leaguers who are doing really well and could get called up and are really pushing for the big leagues. And I love doing that column, but it's something that's really difficult to find time to do. I was trying to do a live stream for a while. I want to do a podcast, and it's just reality hits during the regular season. And it's the stuff that keeps me away, keeps me busy though, for the most part, from early in the morning until late at night, it's a long day, but it's also I have time to do a bunch of stuff in between. It almost feels like an 8-hour day, but I'm doing stuff early until the game's end, and I'm updating closer stuff in a closer depth chart. And it just really, so I think of it as that there's that one game like in Chuck E. Cheese, I remember where you put in the coin and you're trying to push all the coins over, and it's you keep putting the coins in, and all these coins are there and they're just not flowing, they're not going over the top. But at some point you put one coin in and then boom, then they all just start rushing in. And I've been thinking about it that way, where I was at that point, like, yeah, I can do this. And I think it finally got to the point where he just pushed it too far. And I'm like, all right, I can't do that. I got to take a step back. But a lot of my stuff on the wish list, it actually is things that would take stuff off my plate so I can do more. Like I do want to do a podcast live stream kind of thing. I do want to do weekly columns, but yeah, as far as the time and it takes to do what I want these to do, I think it's not possible right now.
No, I think what you do right now, Jason, is I've alluded to it a bunch of times throughout the episode, is something that many of us, if not most of us, rely on tremendously, especially when we're trying to come up with analysis on the fly for, in most cases, whether it be in articles or podcasts or just random tweets and what have you. So keep it up. And the fact that you update so quickly when things happen, whether it's a closer losing their job or just doing poorly, moving them up or down the bullpen depth charts, what have you, on top of the lineup trackers and what have you, like the lineups, as soon as they come out, they're usually up on the site. It's a pretty useful tool. And if you're listening to this and you haven't used Roster Resource, you're probably doing it wrong, but you should probably remedy that as soon as possible. All right, guys, Jason, thank you so much, man, for enlightening everybody a little bit more about the process in which the labor of love, if you will, that is Roster Resource for you. But let's get to the crux of why we're here. We have a whole bunch of trades that happened. We need to talk about not only the implications to the rosters, which I know a lot of people have already done, whether it's in written word or on other podcasts. So we are going to be focusing on the adjustments that were made to teams that may affect who you might be bidding on this week, players that might be available. No, obviously Juan Soto is not available. We don't necessarily care that he moved teams, but he did leave a vacuum. So that'll be something that we talk about. So let's talk about some guys that moved teams and teams that adjusted that may be being affected in our FAAB consideration. So I'm going to mostly, as I talked to you guys off air about, Jason, we want to get your insight as to what kind of adjustments do you think these teams are making based on the additions that they made or subtractions that they made? And then Kevin, obviously the fantasy implications of those moves and whether or not it's going to affect any consideration for bidding this Sunday night in the future as well. In no particular order, though, I think mostly it is in alphabetical order. Let's start with Atlanta. They made two moves here that are of note. Robbie Grossman, they joins their outfield coming from Detroit, and they add to their bullpen with Raciel Iglesias leaving the Angels. First and foremost, Jason, what does this do does Grossman have enough playing time in Atlanta's outfield with Michael Harris and Ronald Acuña taking up most of the time there? And what kind of vacuum does that leave in Detroit, if any?
Yeah, by acquiring Grossman, I think just because he's been so good against left-handed pitching this year, I think you already got half of your platoon there. You got the guy that's going to play against lefties no matter what. You got a guy who can give Acuña Jr.'s a break in right field. And you got a guy who is capable of also hitting right-handed pitching, but he's struggled this year. If you can find something to turn him around, I think that's something that can push Marcell Ozuna, who hasn't had the best year. It just gives him more depth. But so you have some upside there as far as, he could just end up playing every day. I think they do want to take a look. They haven't given him a start against a right-hander yet, but I think obviously they can see him in batting practice and they're going to be working with him. Like, what's wrong with that left-handed swing? And if they can fix him, then somebody like Marcell Ozuna is probably in trouble for some playing time there. So I thought it was a really good pickup. They obviously don't trust Guillermo Heredia because even against lefties, they weren't putting that guy in there. So I think they really fill a hole there while also potentially giving him somebody who can push Ozuna out as well. As far as the Tigers, it's still a little crowded there, even without Grossman, because they've been giving so much playing time to guys like Victor Reyes, Willie Castro. They have Daz Cameron up now. He made a start against a lefty on Thursday. He started against a right-hander yesterday, and then he's out of the lineup again today. So, I think they got the one constant there in Riley Green. I think Akil Baddoo is mostly getting the starts against right-handed pitching. But as far as anybody else on the way, I think it's between those. I haven't heard anything from Austin Meadows. I don't even know he's coming back this year. It's been a rough year for him. And did we really need to find out more about Victor Reyes, about Willie Castro? I don't know. I think those guys are really proven to be valuable bench pieces. Is there more there? I don't know. I think Akil Baddoo probably needs to be playing every day now that they can give it to him in the majors. I think that works out well. But as far as, I don't know, nothing that interesting. Daz Cameron, maybe the Tigers just don't really think he's that good. Because of who his dad is and because he was that prospect. He came over in the Verlander deal. He was a big-time prospect, and it just hasn't quite worked out. So I think it would be interesting if they were just to say, let's play Daz Cameron every day. I'm not sure there's no indication that they're going to do that yet.
Kevin, is there any situation in either of these outfields that you're making considerations for your FAAB bidding this weekend based on basically everything Jason just talked about?
Yeah, absolutely. And he brought up Austin Meadows, who did start taking batting practice with the team earlier this week. There hasn't been an update over the past couple of days. We still don't know how his Achilles, both of them, are responding to running bases, and they'll need to take a look at that before he gets back out and on a rehab assignment. But I think we're getting close enough to where this is where if you have a room, you can grab him for a couple of bucks. And then when he goes on a rehab assignment in a week or two, he becomes $20-$30 to add in FAAB. He's available in over half the leagues. He's still held on to in 40% of main events, 33% of online championships, but he's available in over half the leagues out there. And that's what I would look at here. I do Victor Reyes hitting towards the top of the lineup versus righties right now, but he's 0 for 2 on the season in stolen bases, and that's what we want to see out of him. So we're getting decent batting average. We get some runs scored if he's at the top of the lineup, but if we're not going to get stolen base opportunities out of him, then that kind of diminishes that. Daz Cameron, Jason brought up, is intriguing because he has played 2 of the last 3 days, so it'll be interesting to see going forward what they do, but I don't think there's anything actionable there as of yet.
And real quickly, Kevin, Raisel Iglesias moving to Atlanta, presumably no longer a closer, at least not this year. I think a lot of us just assume that this is a long play for Atlanta, with Jansen probably not returning to the team next year. Is Iglesias here?
Yeah, I think so. He'll get 2 or 3 opportunities if they have 3 or 4 days in a row with the save opportunity, but the job is Jansen's.
All right, this is one of the more fun ones I saw. Brent Phillips, he left Tampa Bay. He got picked up by Baltimore. Of course, he picked number 66 on his uniform, so he's now sporting the Phillips 66 backside of his jersey, which is just a fun call. I'm waiting for the Roto Wear t-shirt, corresponding t-shirt to come out with that logo on there. But Jason, do you see Phillips getting any extra playing time to justify the pure lack of production he was putting up in Tampa Bay?
Not really. He's on the roster, so he's in the lineup the last 2 days because Austin Hayes has been hurt. So yeah, he's there. He's going to get starts every once in a while. The Rays were playing him a lot, so I don't know if they thought it was just going to click at some point. But the Orioles are in a situation where they are trying to win games, and he's somebody who can help them win games defensively, gives them some depth there. They also have a couple young guys who maybe like Yusniel Diaz, maybe Daz Cameron, like maybe they just don't think he's any good. They're not really in a hurry to give him playing time. But Kyle Stowers has emerged this year as a prospect, and I think he's going. He was up briefly earlier in the season. I think at some point they're going to want to take a look at him. And then the guy who's playing a lot right now is Taron Vavra, utility man. So he's been getting starts at DH. He's been very productive so far. So there's not really any reason to, even if Phillips was a guy who can hit a little bit, they don't really have a spot for him right now other than a spot starting, playing in the outfield when Austin Hayes is not available. So yeah, it's there's a long track record of him not being able to hit. So I think we're beyond the 28 years old where you just say this guy's defensive special.
The man is fun to watch.
Great
regardless.
clubhouse chemistry. The fans are going to love him. Teammates are going to love him, and he's going to play. He can play all three outfield spots terrifically. So I think that's enough
and
for the
he
Orioles
can give
right
the
now.
bullpen. It's always fun to watch him give the bullpen a rest.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt.
Jason hit the nail on the head here talking about Hayes. This is a tight oblique, and he's not in the lineup again on Saturday. So this is a little worrisome. This could end up being more and even an IL stint. And if that's the case, Phillips will play against righties, I believe. He'll hit in the 9-hole. And we've seen him have success against righties in the past. He had 12 home runs and 200 plate appearances last year versus right-handed pitching, hit 250. He hasn't performed as well this season, but throughout his career, he's been a nice platoon bat versus righties. So in daily leagues, DFS once in a while, or when they have a bunch of right-handed hitters up, if anything does come more serious with Hayes' injury, then there might be something to look at here. And the defense, like Jason said as well, his arm is going to keep him in the outfield at least at the end of games. He's going to be a defensive replacement at times to even boost another plate appearance here and there if he is playing against right-handed pitching.
All right, we will. I think the moves that Boston made are very questionable, especially as a Red Sox fan myself, but they were made, and so we have to talk about them. At least not all of them. Tommy Pham is readily rostered everywhere, so not really making too much of an adjustment. We already talked about Jackie Bradley Jr. being sent down, so obviously they're going to roll with Jarren Duran in center field, but they put a new first baseman in there, Eric Hosmer, presumably playing pretty much every day at first base. Boston's not paying him, so that's nice to know that they have a little bit more flexibility and maybe an easier time trading him in the offseason as well. We'll see how that works out, but presumably he is the starting first baseman for the Red Sox now. And then they have a new starting catcher, Reese McGuire, who they brought on. McGuire 0% rostered, obviously, across the main event and online championships, but now he's starting at catcher on most days for the Red Sox, which still should be a decent offense. They haven't really produced the way I think most of us would have assumed they would, but it is what it is. Jason, at the start with McGuire, like he should at least get volume with the Red Sox.
Yeah, and I think I had a question I was questioning whether how much do the Red Sox like Kevin Plawecki? Do they think he's valuable enough to just play him over when you got another decent catcher, Reese McGuire? You figure they're both backups, but now you got two of them. One hits lefty, one hits. Is that going to be a platoon? Which it seems like it is going to be. But I also didn't know. You never know with catchers because you can't just look at their offensive statistics and go, okay, Plawecki doesn't hit, so you just figure that they're going to play the other guy over him. There's a lot more that goes into it with the pitching staff and catching ability defensively. So, Reese McGuire's got a couple of chances the last few years and hasn't really been super productive. He's a former first-round pick, so I think he's 27. I think it's worth a look and saying let's see what happens when you give this guy regular at bats for a couple weeks. So I think that's interesting enough there. The Hosmer thing's interesting as well, and
is it?
It's I was trying to think of a different word to describe it. Interesting is usually the first thing.
This is a Pitcherless podcast. You have to make sure we keep it a little clean.
Yeah. I think he hit 377 over the first 6 weeks of the season. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I mean, he was one of the best hitters in baseball for 6 weeks. And yeah, you can still see that there, and you go, okay, what if he just goes off for a few weeks for us? He's capable of doing that. But wow, like how do you go from that to 6 weeks of just like being
absolutely nothing,
like nothing? Like you could have, like Zach Greinke could have been more productive if you just gave Zach Greinke 6 weeks at bats. And that's like, how do you go from this to that? Just what is wrong? How do you fix that? So I think it's intriguing maybe that there's a guy who's capable of doing that, and you got him for, you don't even have to pay the guy. I think maybe we overthink the Fenway Park stuff sometimes as far as, oh, wow, this guy's going to play at Fenway Park. He's going to do this. Hosmer does hit a fair share of balls in the air to left field, so I think that could be interesting. The change of scenery is always it can go either way. It can go bad. It can go good.
Made it very clear that he was not really interested in the change of scenery. And so I'm curious to know whether or not he actually wants to be in Boston. I know Boston wasn't on his no trade list, so that's why he's there and not in Washington. And so we'll see how it rolls out with him throughout the rest of the season. And anybody who knows anything about sports media knows that the Boston sports media is right up there with some of the roughest media in sports. So if he can handle that, it's going to be a lot different than the San Diego media, that's for sure, and the Kansas City media for that matter. Kevin, are you seeing this as simply blocking Tristan Casas a little bit longer so all those speculative ads probably go to the wayside, or is there any other implications that you're seeing in the Boston moves?
There's useful in deeper leagues, as he has been all year, even throughout his slumps. He typically is going to hit in the middle third of the lineup. I think he hit 6th once for Boston so far, 7th the other time. And he's not in the lineup today. Neither him or McGuire are in the lineup on Saturday, which is interesting. They've both been there a couple of days and already getting a day off here on Saturday. Dahlbeck's back in there for Boston. I think this is what we might see a little bit. And as Jason alluded to, Hosmer, when he is hitting the ball in the air, which isn't often, but he seems to do it in streaks, he does like going opposite field with the green monster out there. That can be to his benefit in respect to batting average if it doesn't have the distance, and he does have enough power when he is lifting the ball to put it out opposite field over the green monster. So I have some interest here, mostly in draft and holds, which doesn't really affect what we're doing going forward here, but that's where I roster him mostly, and I think he'll be useful in those leagues. McGuire is a leap of faith because he's never really got a shot, but I think you're correct, Adam. I think he's probably the primary guy, and it could be a platoon, which he's on the strong side of. If that's the way it goes, it's a leap of faith here because we haven't seen a prolonged opportunity for him, but in their lineup in deep two catcher leagues, that could be worth a shot as well.
I do feel like we've been losing catchers, like dropping like flies over the last couple of weeks.
Right.
And so you find somebody who just walked into much more playing time at the position. He's going to be useful to somebody. Like Paul Sporer always says on Sleeper in the Bus, he may not be right for your roster, but he's going to be rostered by somebody in your league. So he will be bid on, regardless of whether or not you agree with it or not. He will be in the mix. So if you are looking for a catcher, he probably needs to at least be in your conditional bids, as he will be getting that extra playing time. And it's probably better than taking a 0 at the position. So we go from my team to your team, Kevin. Kansas City didn't make, I don't think, as many moves as you were hoping, and you alluded to that 2 weeks ago. This is kind of what KC does. They show you on paper all the moves they should be making, and then they make probably 10% of those moves. They didn't really do away with anybody in their bullpen of note, and they did get away with some of their veteran pieces, most notably Whit Merrifield leaving, going to Toronto, somehow being talked into being vaccinated, and now he will be able to travel across the border now. Crazy how that happens when you leave one team and go to a team that's looking for playoff contention. One of the names I think that stood out to me that Kansas City got back was Max Castillo. We talked about him a couple of weeks ago when he was being stretched out by Toronto and getting into the more of a starter role. Is he going to find a rotation spot in Kansas City? And more notably, can we even trust the pitching development from the Royals to bring him up? Brady Singer aside in his recent success, obviously there hasn't been as much success out of the starting pitching prospects that have come up through the system. So what's your take on Castillo going to your Royals?
I like this move for Kansas City. I like the potential of Castillo here, and don't know how much we will see him this season at the major league level, specifically in the rotation. His last couple of appearances with Toronto had gone back to being as a reliever. And it's not just Singer. Daniel Lynch has been better recently. So is Chris Bubik. They couldn't have been any worse, but they have been better. And to answer your development question, I think strides are being made at the minor league levels. So I just see Max Castillo hang out down there for a little bit. I think most Royals fans and people that follow the Royals expect changes to come with the major league pitching staff, coaching staff in the offseason. They haven't done it during the season like they did with the hitting, but I think we expect some changes to be made with the pitching on the pitching side as well going forward. Probably not with a non-contending team and less than 2 months to go in the regular season. I hope that he stays down at AAA Omaha and gets to see some success. And I do see him as possibly a part of the rotation going into 2023. That's not going to help us much this season, but that's probably where he's going to end up.
Jason, did you see anything else, any other moves that Kansas City made that kind of stood out to you as far as how you adjusted their pieces in their pitching and or their lineup?
Yeah, I just think that, and it's been going in this direction anyways, it's just they're opening playing time up for the young prospects. And so that was already happening with Junior, obviously, from the start of the season. Vinny Pasquantino took a while, but he's there. And now it's a matter of, okay, let's make sure that we're getting Nick Prado every day at bats. And now you got guys like Michael Massey, Nate Eaton as well, who aren't those elite type prospects, but they're like at the least bench guys. They're the guys who they're not ranked in the top 10 of your farm system, but these are the guys that you send to Arizona Fall League because you go, these guys they're guys who are going to be big leaguers. Let's see what they do in Arizona Fall League against some really good talent, and let's see what other positions they can play. So you see guys like Massey was mostly a second baseman, but he's played some third base as well. And then somebody like Nate Eaton has played mostly outfield this year, and he's started 2 games in a row in right field, but he's also played third in the minors. So I think those guys aren't going to, because they're not the top prospects, they have to really prove themselves. So when they have time, which is now, that's when you look at these guys and you go, okay, this is your chance here. If they don't play well, they can easily just get buried on that depth chart. So I think guys like Massey and Eaton will be auditioning right now and really getting the chance to show that, look, maybe I can be more than just a bench guy.
I'm extremely disappointed in both of you for not talking about how the fact that MJ Melendez is the leadoff hitter for the Royals, and I just want to make sure that I put a spotlight on that. And that doesn't seem to be changing, Kevin. Is that something you expect to stick for the rest of the year?
I do for this season anyway. And another thing that needs brought up, especially for maybe not, I don't think he was given up on in many completely anyway, in many dynasty leagues yet, but in keeper leagues where you have minor league slots, Drew Waters is probably available, and you should go look at what he's doing in Omaha.
It's a spoiler. It's good. It's good things. Yeah. All right, we're going to try to touch on this really quickly. If you guys have anything new to talk about, because we talked about Joey Gallo going to the Dodgers earlier. As Kevin alluded to, he's readily available in a lot of different leagues, still 85% rostered in main event, but 39% rostered in the online championship. So in those shallower 12-teamers, more than half of those leagues have cut bait with him at some point during the season. So he's still out there. Does a change of scenery is the change of scenery for Gallo worth spending a good chunk of whatever you have, whatever FAAB you have left, Kevin?
I don't think I'm going high dollar amounts here, but I think depending on the league, you might not have to yet. Anyway, I think you could sneak him through. If he gets a few games under his belt and starts hitting a couple home runs for the Dodgers, he's going to be snatched up everywhere. So if you have room, you grab him now, as we mentioned earlier.
And then, Jason, do you expect Gallo to be playing, like you mentioned earlier, because of who they gave up for him, because they took on his contract? Do you expect this to be something that we see Gallo playing every day? And this is his walk year as well, if I'm not mistaken. So it's nice that he was able to get traded and not have to be subject to the possible qualifying offer. Not to say that his production would have given him a qualifying offer this year, but it is nice to know that he'll have some options since the qualifying offer is still intact at least through this season.
Yeah, I think he's going to play against right-handed pitching. I think there's at least a big enough window where the Dodgers knew they were going to have it. So we're going to acquire this guy. We're going to give him a chance, because if we can turn him around, he's an impact hitter. He's got a couple of tough matchups today and tomorrow. He's going to face Clevenger and Darvish, and then looks most likely he's facing Joe Ryan, Sonny Gray, and on Tuesday and Wednesday against the Twins. Then so he should be in there for the most part. It looks like they might have one lefty against when they face the Royals next weekend, but and then they go to Milwaukee and they're going to face some really tough right-handed pitching. So he's going to get tested the Dodgers are going to see what they have like pretty quickly here against really good playoff caliber pitching. So I think by the time, and I don't think Padres aren't going to make a run at the Dodgers. And so the Dodgers are the team that could afford to do this and just say, look, we might struggle. Let's give them some time to try to turn things around. And at some point, you mentioned Edwin Rios earlier. We didn't really talk about him, but that's a guy he's been hurt a lot. That's a guy he can hit, and when he's gotten a chance, when he's been healthy, he looks like a guy who can hit, left-handed hitter. So at some point, I can imagine if Gallo struggles for a couple of weeks and then you got Edwin Rios healthy, maybe you do just cut ties, or maybe you just let him sit on the bench. And whenever he plays, we need a home run here. Pinch hitter, Gallo, just try to hit a home run. There you go. Or else, I'm not sure what the value is. But like I said, I think they do have a big enough window to see if he is going to turn things around.
Yeah, unfortunately, the Dodgers do not travel to Colorado. If you're thinking, oh, great, he got traded to the NL West, he's going to at least have a couple of at-bats in Colorado. That's not going to happen. They do host the Rockies for 12 games at the end of the season. It's not 12, but it is 6 games straight, 2 straight series in LA. Unfortunately, we're not going to see Gallo in Denver, at least not this season. All right, Milwaukee even though they traded away their closer in Josh Hader, they added to their bullpen. They brought in Taylor Rogers, Matt Bush, even Trevor Rosenthal, who was signed by the Giants and never threw a pitch. Jason, I'm going to start with you here, but what does the Milwaukee bullpen depth chart look like by the end of just this month? And do we see Trevor Rosenthal even throwing a pitch for Milwaukee before he changes teams again, maybe?
Yeah, they acquired him for a reason. I haven't heard anything on.
So did San Francisco, but
the Giants they signed him thinking, okay, he's going to help us out down the stretch because we're going to be in the playoff hunt, which is August, September. And so now that they don't think they're going to be in that, the Brewers are the team that's taking. And the Brewers traded away Josh Hader, and I think Devin Williams is a capable replacement for Josh Hader. So it was really, they're leaving a hole in the 7th and 8th innings right there. And so you got Taylor Rogers, who I think he'll probably be better in that role. You got Matt Bush, who struggled a little bit in his first couple outings. And so I think they expect Rosenthal to make an impact. I know whether he's getting saves or not, it would be, he would really need Devin Williams to struggle, which he hasn't really struggled much. He had maybe a short little rough patch earlier in the season, but I think for the most part, he's going to be able to hold down the job. And you're really counting on Rosenthal to bounce back to what he was with the Padres, and before that, with Kansas City, I think is where he first started turning things around. I mean, he was pretty dominant. So you get that guy in there with Rogers, Bush, Brad Boxberger. You got a good enough group of arms to get the ball to Devin Williams, and they're going to need it. I think they have the really good starting rotation, but trying to get the ball to Devin Williams could be a challenge if those guys don't step up.
And then, Kevin, are you taking any flyers on either any of these guys taking the job from Williams, which I think a lot of us are just presuming was the presumption, or any of the holes that like Matt Bush leaving Texas? He wasn't exactly getting saves for them. Their bullpen is now a little bit lighter. San Diego's bullpen obviously is all set, and Rosenthal wasn't really playing a part. So I guess that question's almost moot unless you want to focus on Texas. But are you taking a flyer on any of these guys or any of the other situations that they left behind?
No, I don't think so at the moment. And we haven't even seen Rosenthal pitch yet, not even at the minor league level on a rehab stint, because he's dealing with a hamstring. And the injury is different than what he had previous when he was signed by Kansas City a few years ago after being horrendous for 4 different teams the previous year. When he came back from Tommy John, it took him a long time to get both control and command back at all. Anything. He couldn't find the plate. That's a different injury, but it's something to keep an eye on as he makes his way back. So, yeah, I agree. It's Devin Williams in Milwaukee, maybe Trevor Rogers once in a while because of the matchups and being a lefty. But for the most part, yeah, I don't see much here.
All right, I'm hoping Trevor Rogers doesn't make an appearance for anybody else at this point in the season, so I'm going to go with Taylor Rogers. Yeah, there's way too many Rogers. There's almost as many Rogers as there are Garcias. We'll leave it there. Another closer changing teams. Minnesota acquiring Jorge Lopez from Baltimore. They also added to the rotation with Tyler Mahle. we'll just keep going with our closer talk here. And even though he blew a save yesterday on Friday, Jason, do you see Lopez holding down the fort there in Minnesota at the end of games? And how much are we enjoying the Felix Bautista show in Baltimore now that Lopez is gone?
Yeah, and Lopez has earned that shot, that chance to come in and blow his first save and not really have anybody question whether he's going to be the closer or not. He's been that good this year. And this is a guy who's struggled for years to figure things out. So if this happens a second time and a third time over the next 2 weeks, yeah, then you go. We do have Duran can close. I do think they really like Duran in the role he is in now. So we'll just put him in whenever we just really want to just blow away the other team. And that could be the 7th, it could be the 8th. It doesn't. At some point, we'll put him in there. But we know we got Lopez there waiting in the 9th, who's now a proven closer. And then they have some depth as well with adding Michael Fulmer. Griffin Jacks has had a good year as well. So I think they're pretty happy with what they have there right now. And so it really depends on Lopez just making sure that he continues to do what he was doing with the Orioles. And then the Orioles with Bautista there. Yeah, that was, I think, you can never have enough pitching, but it's also very rare to have a team have so many pitchers going above their projections, just like above and beyond what anybody thought any of these guys were going to be. Dylan Tate has struggled for a couple of years. He was a good prospect. CNL Perez was DFA'd by the Reds. That's how he ended up with the Orioles. Joey Cribell has bounced around. Nobody thought Keegan Aiken was going to end up. If Keegan Aiken was in the bullpen, it was just because he's just never going to be a good starter. He's our long guy, but he's made a huge impact. Even guys like Brian Baker, and they have a couple more arms there as well. Nick Vespi is a guy who can be very good. That's why you end up saying, okay, we can trade Jorge Lopez. We got a guy who can step in right away, and we got a bunch of other really good pitchers behind him. But at least there's no question there in that one. Whenever there is a closer change, it's usually, we don't know. We'll look at the matchups.
Take a stab on this guy. Take a stab on that guy.
Yeah. This guy's also been really good for us. But I don't think there's any question. As soon as he was traded, okay, Felix Bautista's the closer.
With that note, Kevin, are you expecting Bautista to be like the top earning, I guess, FAAB pickup this Sunday based on the assumed role he has with a team that is doing a lot better than most people expected and are continuing to fight for a playoff spot?
I think so, but I think he was already in a lot of spots.
100% rostered in main events right now, 46% rostered in online championships. So those deeper leagues, there's been some specs on him for quite some time.
Right. We talk a lot about how I don't like changing out my speculative closers, but earlier this season, after watching him pitch, because they had a series against the Royals and I didn't know much about him, I made an exception to that, and he was stashed on many of my teams in my spot that I had where I would stash a closer. So I think he's been snatched up most places. If he's available, then yes, I think he is their closer the rest of the way. I think they continue to be an exciting team. They're fighting for a playoff spot. Seems crazy. We didn't think this was going to be the case. They have 2 full 7-game weeks upcoming. So, there's going to be opportunities there as long as they continue to win some games. And I think he's the guy. Absolutely. I really like Felix Bautista. We've known that for a couple of months now. We've talked about him several times. And Lopez, I think Jason is completely right. I think he's earned the right to have it was his first game for a new team. He was still pumping 100 miles an hour throughout his appearance on Friday. And I think he's going to be just fine. The slight worry, Minnesota is a team. He will be the guy, but they might play a matchup here and there. He may not get quite as many of the opportunities as we'd like, but he'll get a good majority of them.
All right. And as I mentioned, Tyler Mahle also going to Minnesota, leaving the rotation of Cincinnati behind, as Luis Castillo does as well, going to Seattle last week. Hunter Green also hits the IL as of yesterday. We didn't touch on that in our news section, but it leaves a whole bunch of rotation pieces open in Cincinnati. Kevin, I'm going to get your fantasy take on this one first. Is there anybody filling in that rotation that you are looking to stream? I think I talked about this either last week or the week before. It is worth noting that Cincinnati doesn't have a whole lot of home games this month. So there's that to consider. But even with that, are you looking to stream any fill-in rotation pieces for the Reds.
I think there's too much up in the air, because if you look at their schedule, they get the Mets the first half of this week, and then they are at home for 2 series versus the Cubs and Phillies. The end of next week, they go to Pittsburgh. So once it comes clear, maybe later this week or over next weekend, I'm sure we'll talk about this next week, there may be somebody we'd be interested in for that series at Pittsburgh in a couple of weekends. But I don't think there's much that we can do right now.
It might be interesting just to see how much work their bullpen gets throughout this stretch, whether or not they put some more on them to produce or at least eat innings throughout this time until in the next 2 weeks when they get Hunter Green back in the rotation and things start to iron out, as you mentioned. I'm going to move into another bullpen, and that is Philadelphia. They brought in David Robertson from the Cubs, and we'll talk about the Cubs in a second. They also lost Michael Givens to the Mets. But first, staying in Philadelphia, Jason, do you see David Robertson keeping that job in Philly, or would you suggest that Brad Hand and or Sir Anthony Dominguez keep at least a timeshare of closing situations and save situations for the Phillies that fantasy managers should consider holding on to them?
Yeah, I think it's a possibility just because he's that veteran guy. He's having a good year. I think it's quite possible that they look at that situation and go, look, all right, came in and got the save on his first opportunity. We trust him. Let's just keep Sir Anthony and Brad Hand in the setup roles. I think that's a possibility. But what they were doing before it just seemed like Sir Anthony Dominguez, he's their main guy, but they didn't necessarily wait until the 9th inning to use him. And I think they like that flexibility there, where Robertson, I think if they trust him enough, I think we'll see how it goes the next time the next save opportunity comes up. If they go to Robertson, then we know they're pretty much answering the question, I think, which is in a lot of situations. It's like, all right, we're going to go to a committee. Okay. And I think one of the managers it was the other day with the Padres before they traded for Hader. And Bob Melvin actually came out and said after the game, he had said, we're moving away from Taylor Rogers as a closer. We're going to go to a committee, matchups based. We went to Luis Garcia, who was the top option. He was the obvious choice. And then they asked him about it. He said, yeah, he got the job done. I imagine if we have another save chance tomorrow, he's going to get the ball again. Because it's like he just earned his trust. Why would I go in a different direction? And I think that's what happens a lot. So in a situation like this where you go, okay, Sir Anthony Dominguez is fine as a closer. Brad Hand's been fine when they needed him. But when you have a couple options there and you go to the guy who you think is at the top of that list and you give it to Robertson and he just does a good job and you go, okay, the next time we're in that situation, I'm going to go to the same guy. I trust him. All right, he did the job. All right, the manager doesn't have to say it. I think we all just know, okay, he's the closer. And I think we're not quite to that point yet, but we're leaning towards that.
Yeah. I talked about this earlier. I don't think at this stage of the season, contracts per se come into play. Obviously, Brad Hand, getting the biggest contract of the group here, but both Robertson and Hand going to be free agents at the end of the season. But I do think what might come into consideration is the fact that Sir Anthony Dominguez is arbitration eligible for the next couple of years, and saves count in those negotiations when looking at arbitration dollars. So whether or not that plays a role, at least from the front office down into where he is placed in games, giving a little bit more edge to David Robertson with everything you just talked about, Jason, at least that's where my mind goes at first glance, no matter how good Dominguez has been. Let's talk about, Kevin, the Chicago Cubs bullpen. As I mentioned, Michael Givens goes to New York, being reunited with Buck Showalter. First off, does Givens have any fantasy relevancy? Obviously not going to close games out in New York, but maybe as a possible ratio chip, somebody we always talk about in that normal category, chipping away at ratios, not going to give, maybe vulturing a win here or there based on what his usage is going to be. But then going back to Chicago, is Rowan Wick the obvious closer option left after they pretty much decimated their top of their bullpen?
Yeah, first of all, with Wick, I think he is the guy for right now, and pretty decent schedule coming up for the Cubs. They got Washington coming to town. They get to go to Washington the following week. They do have to go to Cincinnati in between, but they're pretty decent matchups for some possible wins so that there would be save opportunities. Wick is a little scary. All right, we're at 8 games in a row now of not giving up an earned run, but when he blows up, he likes to blow up. We had a 3 earned run outing, another
Go big or go home.
2 and a 1, back to 5 earned runs in back-to-back outings back in mid-June. So he's not somebody, we see it on Twitter a lot. Jeff Erickson and many others, don't watch your closers. He's definitely not one I recommend watching if he's in your lineup and he comes into the game to close one out. But I think he's the guy for now. And yeah, you're 100% right with Gibbons. Unless it's a holds league, he's not going to get the saves, but he does go more than an inning from time to time, and I think he will for the Mets, depending on matchups, and be that good ratios guy. If your starting pitching staff isn't as deep as you'd like for a given week, put him in there instead of your 6th or 7th starter.
Jason, in your experience, or at least just in your observations, does a player being reunited with an old manager like Givens is with Showalter of their time in Baltimore play into how they're used, whether it's on the offensive side with hitters in a platoon role or position they're going to play or whatnot, or in the bullpen, whether or not he knows Givens, he trusts Givens, he's going to put him into those situations where he could go maybe more than 1 inning or be put into a situation where he could be in closer games rather than blowouts. So in holds leagues, this might make him a little bit more valuable.
It depends. I think I've been thinking it more as a circle of trust with the manager and his relievers. And if he already knows Givens, even if you can look at his stats and go, okay, he's been a really good reliever for a while, but especially if he knows him, he trusts him, I think, that helps out a lot. And he's probably more willing to be like Givens gave up 5 runs. What did he give up? 5 runs in his debut, which was a blowout game, but it was just kind of, all right, I'm just going to ease you into action here with your new team. Didn't go well, but look, I'm going to throw you right back out there. And he came back with a scoreless outing yesterday. So, yeah, it definitely helps in that case, whereas opposed to if you didn't know the guy and had no connection to him, he just, whoa, who did you just give me? Just give me. I'm not going to use this guy again. So, yeah, I think it could.
That's fair. All right, let's move back to the offensive side. San Francisco also didn't make that many moves. Carlos Rodon still on the Giants, but they did acquire J.D. Davis. So, Jason, do you see him gaining more playing time, even though we know San Francisco, we alluded to it all already earlier in the show. They love their platoons and all that. But what can he do with the Giants as far as playing time? Is he at least going to get more than he was getting with the Mets?
It depends on Longoria, where he's always hurt, and I think it's hard to even keep track. But I believe he's close to coming back, and at that point, it's just Davis will probably be more of a platoon guy. I have to believe. If still a big if with Longoria, the guy needs to stay healthy. You're going to have Thairo Estrada back in the picture as well, and Brandon Crawford is off the IL today, so it's still very crowded there. He's going to be in the lineup against lefties. Again, you have to think we're looking ahead to 2023 with Davis. He's still under contract for 2 more years. And then Longoria so Longoria is going to be a free agent. He has a club option. So I think it's more looking ahead and saying, look, okay, we got a guy who's going to play against lefties. Let's give him more time against right-handers than the Mets were giving him because our third baseman is hurt. So yeah, I think it's going to be a brief audition if Longoria is back in the next couple of weeks, but it's something. And it's something where if he's really hot, and we've seen him in the past, he gets hot and he goes on a run. Maybe you tell Evan Longoria, hey, ease up on your rehab over there. We don't want you to hurt yourself when you come back. Just take your time. I think that's a possibility. But I think it's more looking ahead to 2023 and making sure they have an option there at one of the, whether it's at the least it's platoon, but a guy who could possibly be a third baseman.
All right, Kevin, let's move on to the big one. Of course, we all know about Juan Soto and Josh Bell being moved to San Diego. And as I've probably said 3 or 4 times already in this podcast, we don't care about that. What we do care about, I think, is what they left behind in Washington. So talk to me about any interesting players that you might be looking at that's going to fill the holes at whether it's first base, in the outfield, at the DH spot for, as Nick Pollitt's been calling them, the Natty Lights.
Yeah, I think the easy one is Luke Voigt. He's going to slide right into Bell's spot. And Bell was putting up nice numbers, even counting stats-wise, in spite of the rest of the lineup there. So Voit could continue to do the same. Of course, that lineup did include Juan Soto previously. I think Voit is the easy one. He's going to take a hit in RBIs and runs a little bit, but he's still in the top third of a lineup and has power. It becomes a little more intriguing when we get to the outfield. I think Lane Thomas and Victor, they're going to roll with Victor Robles in center field. I still don't have interest, even as a leadoff hitter. He just hasn't done enough. I'm not falling for this. As I said earlier in the season, I'm still not in that boat. But yeah, I think the main interest here, because I'm not interested in guys really at the bottom of the lineup unless they're going to run. Cesar Hernandez hit in the 9 spot in their last game, and he does have a couple of stolen bases this year, which is shocking because he hadn't for a couple of years. But I don't see anything down towards the bottom I'd be interested in. It's Luke Voit for me.
Jason, have you looked at, oh, obviously you have, but like, do you see anybody else that kind of comes to mind as you were updating the roster research page for Washington that could fill in to any of these gaps that Kevin didn't touch on?
Yeah, with Lane Thomas, I think he had been maybe back and forth a few times, but as far as platooning and starting, but with Robles, pretty much he's locked in center right now. So I think Thomas had taken a step back on the depth chart, but now he's probably going to play again every day. You got a guy like Josh Palacios, who they got on waivers from the Blue Jays earlier in the season. He's been in AAA all season. He's putting up big numbers. Again, like a lot of people in AAA, he's having a good year. So I think he's going to get a look. He had 18 stolen bases and I think about 300 plate appearances since the Nats had him down in AAA. Not a ton of power, but I think a guy that they're at least going to take a look at. The outfielder they had on the 40-man roster. Donovan Casey is one of the guys they got from the Dodgers in that Scherzer Trey Turner deal. And he's on the 40-man. He was up briefly earlier in the season. He's not playing well at all. Yeah, his numbers in 2022 are really bad. They were really bad after Washington acquired him last year. So I'll probably rule him out. It'd be interesting to see if they take a chance on a guy like David Dahl, who they recently picked up after he was released from the Brewers. I'm not sure if he had an opt-out, but he's with the Nationals now. So as far as like a guy that you've heard of that could get some at-bats, I think Nelson Cruz is back in the lineup today. He had missed 3 games in a row with an injury. I think he's a guy that, I don't know, not that he doesn't want to play, but it's almost like a respect thing. If you're not feeling great, just come on. We don't want you to have to deal with this situation. Go on the IL and go spend some time with your family. And I don't know how that works, but I can see him.
Felt bad for Nelson Cruz. I felt like he's the Joey Votto of the Nationals, who's just like, all right, bye guys. It was nice to meet you. Now anybody of note is now gone, and here I am, left holding the bag almost.
Yeah, and they got Luke Voit should really be DHing as well. I'm not sure how that's going to work out at first. I don't think it matters too much at this point. I think they want both of those bats in the lineup when possible. But yeah, and then of course CJ Abrams, once they decide that it's time, I think at some point they'd probably, I don't know if they'd move Cesar Hernandez over to third base to share time with Michael Franco. I think that makes sense to just say, look, CJ Abrams is our shortstop. He's going to be our shortstop. I think if you're looking at service time, he's already been in the minors enough to where you already have him for the next 6 seasons, regardless of how long he's up. I'm not sure where he's at as far as Super 2 arbitration or anything. I don't think that matters as much. But at some point, the Nationals are going to want to take a look at their second base and shortstop combination of Garcia and Abrams and give them at least a month together before 2023.
Yeah, so you touched on the last note here. Of course, CJ Abrams, part of that deal going to Washington. He was demoted to AAA upon his acquisition. To be fair, if I'm not mistaken, they did the same thing when they traded for Josiah Gray with the Dodgers. They demoted him, and then they brought him up shortly thereafter. So, Kevin, for all those of us, as I was suggesting people do last week, taking flyers on CJ Abrams before the trade deadline, assuming that if he was part of that deal, he would be able to run rampant in the Washington Nationals lineup. Do you see a path forward for should we be cutting bait on those flyers, or is it still a flyer that you think for fantasy wise is still worth holding on to?
I think they probably find a spot for him prior to the end of the season. However, You have the veteran Cesar Hernandez playing second base, and probably their best remaining offensive player in Luis Garcia at shortstop. So I'm not really sure what they're going to do there. Maybe somebody moves to third base, any of the three, including CJ Abrams, and they cut bait with Maikel Franco. But it's being a middle infielder is the only spot where you're somewhat blocked by in the Washington lineup. Mm-hmm. So there are concerns, but I don't think I'd drop him quite yet.
There was talk of Abrams taking some outfield reps when he was this San Diego early on, just because he was obviously readily blocked. In theory, he was blocked at shortstop in San Diego long term, but I'm not sure if Washington's going to go that same route. I'm not sure that their middle infield options that they have long term would really dictate unless it's going to be a short-term fix where they just want to get him into the lineup and maybe throw him in the outfield just for funsies. I'm not sure that'll be the case for Abrams long-term. I think it does. If anything, it solidifies Abrams as a long-term middle infielder, if not specifically shortstop of the future, being in that franchise. All right, guys, I'm going to give you guys the open floor. I put this list together for us to talk about. Tell me what I missed in another area, whether it's a trade or transaction that was made this last week that you're keeping an eye on, that other people should be more aware of than I led everybody to believe. Kevin, I will start with you here.
This didn't have much to do with the transaction at all, but Nick Gordon is moving up a bit in Minnesota's lineup over the past few games. He'd been towards the bottom of the lineup, anywhere between 7, 8, 9 for the most part throughout the season, with being slid into some other parts throughout the year. Over the past few days, he's typically been in the 5 or 6 spot, and he's been hitting a lot of doubles recently. The extra base hits have been there. He finally got his 5th home run of the season, and that was his first home run since July 2nd. So it took him over a month between home runs, just his 5th on the year, but a lot of doubles. We know about the stolen bases. He's got 4 on the year now, been caught 3 times. That's a bit concerning, but this week, as with the home run, he's back, got a stolen base again this week. And I like this move up in the lineup. And as with Ramon Urias, who I'd been bringing up for several weeks, Nick Gordon is really high on the hard contact percentage rank. He's 22nd in all of baseball in hard contact. So good things happen when he's at the plate, good things happen when anybody is at the plate and hits the ball hard. So once again, Alexander Chase, give a shout out to him for drilling this into my head about hard hits per plate appearance being better than per batted ball event. And this is really looking like something could be going on here for Nick Gordon, between hitting the ball hard and everyday playing time, and now moving up in the lineup a little bit.
Nice. Jason, is there anything else that you noticed over the last week as far as, could be anything, could be change in lineup position, could be change in usage, could just be a trade that I didn't touch on that I think is worth talking about a little bit, or at least people keeping an eye on? Yeah,
I think it's hard to pinpoint like young pitchers at this point, because we can look at, we're talking about CJ Abrams and go, okay, we know the Nationals want to give him this amount of, it would be good to give him this amount of at-bats before the end of the season so they can see what they got. It's different with pitchers, because young pitchers are trying to manage their innings and like trying to keep them healthy, which is like almost an impossible thing to do, it seems like these days. But I think there's some pitching prospects out there who are going to get a look at the end of the season. We've already seen Roansy Contreras. They send him back to the minors. He's probably gonna be back. With trading Quintana, opened up that spot. We should open up for a spot for him permanently. The Reds trading Malley away. I think that probably, at least, I think Justin Dunn's gonna get a look. I don't know if he's fallen way down as far as what people think he's gonna be, but I think he's gonna get a look. They have Brandon Williamson down there, who they got I think that was the Jesse Winker deal, is from the Mariners. He's probably their top pitching prospect now that Hunter Green is graduated. I saw him pitch yesterday. Good stuff. Struggled a little bit, but at 24 years old, I think he's probably worth taking a look at him just based on how few options the Reds have. They're running out of guys there. They got Robert Duggar making starts. I think you got a guy like Ben Lively, maybe, who's a journeyman. Justin Nicolino down in the AAA. I don't know if anybody remembers Justin Nicolino. Deck McGuire's
some
down
names
there.
here. I like it.
Oh, these are all guys that are in AAA for the Reds that could possibly get called up just because they're running out of options. And so I look at a team like that and I go, okay, all right, we got a prospect we can debut. And like I said, Brandon Williamson is a guy who's there. The Pirates have a lot of interesting arms aside from Contreras, who haven't gotten a look yet. And like I said, it's not really is as clear cut because you don't know when these guys are going to get shut down because we don't want them pitching in September because we're trying to make sure that they don't get hurt. Guys like Mike Burrows is having a really good year for them. They recently acquired Johan Oviedo from the Cardinals. I'm not sure if anybody trusts him, but I think he could get a look. He could get some starts there. So, yeah, that's just some of the stuff I'm looking at.
Yeah, we don't have our roster expansion as we've done in the past where the teams get an extra like 15 players that they can add in September. But teams like you mentioned, like Cincinnati, like Pittsburgh, who shipped off a bunch of pieces, they got to fill those 26 man rosters somehow, and might as well take this opportunity to see what they got. So something to keep an eye out for sure. And most people will be watching Roster Resource to see where they slot in as they come up. So keep up the good work there, Jason. Kevin, any final words after we went a little bit long? We didn't go the 7 hours that you suggested we might, but we definitely crossed the 2 hour mark here. All really good stuff. I appreciate both of your guys' insights to what we were talking about, but leave us with anything else worth considering, Kevin.
Yeah, be really careful with schedules this week. There are quite a few teams they may not only have 5 games for the week, but they do only have 2 for the first 4 days of the week. There's at least a handful. There hasn't been a whole lot of those recently. There's even a couple of teams that only have 2 games over the weekend. They have Friday off, Cincinnati and Chicago Cubs. So pay close attention to this when you're setting your bids on Sunday night. Make sure you got everything accounted for. It's something we haven't had to watch real closely recently with the couple of short all-star break weeks, and coming out of the break, everybody played. It may be off people's radar a bit.
All right. Yeah. That's usually a section that got cut based on this new format, right. Of course, the most interesting part of my day. We cut that right out, but that's pretty much going to sum it up for this episode 71. Jason Martinez, I want to thank you once again, man, for taking the extra time, for joining us here. Again, like I said at the top of the show, I couldn't have thought of someone better to break lineups and rotations and bullpens down with all the different roster moves that were made over the last week, mostly due to the trade deadline. So thanks once again, man, for joining us. Could you, for whatever reason, if we haven't mentioned it enough, let everybody know what you do and how you do it?
Yeah, so I'm at Fangraphs. There's an actual tab called Roster Resource now. So that's where my stuff is. It has its own tab. You just click on one of the teams. You'll see what I identify as a roster/depth chart. My vision of what that team looks like this very second. Maybe not 2 minutes from now, definitely not a few hours from now, but that's what the state of that team is. All the way down through the minors. Don't include all the minor leaguers. Try to include the ones you should know, which ends up being a lot, like 100 of them down there. So constantly keeping track of that stuff. Closers, who's the closer situations, I keep really close tabs on that stuff. So who's the closer for the Angels? I don't think we quite know yet, but I'm definitely looking at the end of their games right now. If they ever, when they are winning, they've had a couple saves the last few days. The Rangers as well, things like that. I'm constantly looking at that stuff. So you can trust that I've everything on that site. There's been at least a little bit of thought put into it as far as why is it the way it is? And so it's definitely a little bit of projection, but the confirmation comes pretty quickly afterwards, and then the adjustments as well.
That's awesome. You guys, obviously, you should all be utilizing that resource throughout the course of the season. I know Kevin and I utilize the lineup tracker probably the most of every piece on there. The fact that you go back weeks on that sheet and it all fits on the screen, it is tremendously useful.
I love the probables grid as well. And what I love about it is when things aren't officially announced, Jason's got somebody in there who educated guess of who we think it's going to be. Gives you more to think about, even if it hasn't been officially announced, and you can dig deeper, see if you agree or not. But he's usually got somebody slotted in to each day going forward.
As opposed to looking at the actual like MLB app and you're scrolling through and you're like,
TBD,
unannounced,
TBD,
unannounced,
TBD.
unannounced. Yeah, exactly. That's not useful.
Yeah, that's the best part about what I do is it doesn't have to be official. And that's the thing with MLB is that they're listing the official moves, but you're waiting for the paperwork to come in. And I don't know, it's already been announced. The beat reporter is announcing stuff as soon as they hear it from the manager, and it's hours before it's official. So it gives me a bit of an edge there.
All right. Thanks again, Jason, for coming on. That's going to wrap it up for episode 71 of On the Wire. Please make sure to subscribe, share, and review the podcast wherever you're listening. We will, of course, be back every Sunday with detailed FAAB breakdowns throughout the 2022 season, or what's left of it. And, of course, keep an eye out for Kevin's companion article over at pitcherlist.com that comes out every Sunday afternoon as well. You could follow myself on the Twitter at 80grade. That's all spelled out. Kevin is at HastingKevin. Of course, follow the pod itself at On the Wire Pod. Once again, thank our guest, Jason Martinez, for joining us. Follow him on the Twitter at JasonRR Martinez. With that, I am Adam Howe, and on behalf of Kevin Hasting, thanks for listening. That we bid you goodbye.
Nervous about using public Wi-Fi? Imagine being able to turn yourself invisible to hackers on public networks. Having McAfee Plus is just like that. With the click of a button, you can disappear from hackers trying to steal your data and snoop on your internet activity. Browse, shop, and bank confidently, knowing your privacy and safety are protected. Get all-in-one protection with McAfee Plus and learn how to protect your everything at McAfee.com/podcast.
TaxAct can think of a million things more fun than filing taxes. TaxAct is going to name some now. Sitting in traffic. Folding a fitted bedsheet. Listening to your coworker talk about his fantasy team. Digging a hole. Digging an even larger hole next to that original hole. Unfortunately, TaxAct's filing software can't make taxes fun. But TaxAct can help you get them done. TaxAct. Let's get them over with.
The reviews are in for McDonald's hotter, juicier burgers. Let's hear what Hamburglar has to say.
Robble, robble.
What our old friend Hamburglar said is, the patties are juicier. The bun is a thing of beauty. The cheese perfectly melted.
Robble.
My burger dreams have come true. You heard him, folks. These are McDonald's best burgers ever. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Robble. Available at most restaurants in this area. Comparison of McDonald's classic burgers to prior burgers.
Luxury is meant to be livable. Discover the new leather collection at Ashley with premium quality leather sofas, recliners, and more, all built to last. No matter how many spills, scuffs, or pet-related mishaps come its way, the leather collection at Ashley is made with the durability you need for the whole family. Shop the new leather collection at Ashley and find chairs starting at $499.99 and sofas at $599.99. Ashley, for the love of home.